Good test. Okay. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Secret Stories, cracking the phonics code with the brain in mind. What an exciting day. You're not going to believe this, but there are 10 countries represented watching via live stream. So welcome to our friends in Mexico, New Zealand, Japan, Canada, Pakistan, South Africa, Australia, India, Honduras, and across the United States are watching via live stream. So let's give a big shout out, a big welcome to our friends there. Yes. Well, it's going to be a great day today. I know everybody's so excited to hear what Katie is going to be teaching us today. Just a couple of housekeeping items. The restrooms are on both sides of the building and in between, and also upstairs. We are going to break for lunch at noon, and lunch will be 12 to 1. There are plenty of places to eat. If you are not familiar with the area, just raise your hand, Washington County, Bristol City people. You can ask one of those folks where to go, but there are plenty of places, great places to eat on several exits. So again, thank you for coming, and I hope you enjoy the day.
Thanks so much. And I am so excited to be here. Thank you guys so much for coming. I know some of you are here and local, and I know others of you drove. Raise your hand if you drove longer than an hour. Okay, wow, good for you. And I'm so glad that you came in person, because the virtual, which we're thrilled that it's happening live, it is going to cap at 1,000. And so it's going to be, unfortunately, like stopped then and shut. So not only are you guys in the perfect place because you're live, but you're in. So for everybody that's not able to get in virtually, that can't even hear me right now, come on down, and then you can get a seat over here where there are some. I wish they could. I wish I could let you know that, because I'm hoping, I got to stay in front of the, actually, can you hear me if I'm over here? My mic's on? Okay. I'm hoping that as many that are trying to log in can, but I'm so grateful for those of you that are here, and especially for those of you that drove, because I drove too, and I know it's a long drive, but I really am thrilled that you're here. Hopefully you're also going to take away a ton of strategies, because that is really my goal today. Whether you already use these strategies in your classroom or if you've never heard of what they are, it's a mindset shift. And we're going to look at the brain science that really lets us do things we would never think are possible at an age where we would never even expect it to occur. Raise your hand if you teach kindergarten. Okay, wow, that's a lot. Raise your hand if you teach first grade, second grade, third grade, fourth grade, fifth grade, higher than fifth in middle or upper. Okay, SPED or EL, SPED or just SPED, not ELs, but SPED or speech person. Anybody speech? Okay, ELL. And if you're a literacy coordinator or reading person specifically, or admin. Okay, so we've got a pretty good mix. I will say that what we're going to talk about, the table where we all sit. So it's not, this isn't a program. It's a way of giving access to the whole code sooner rather than later. Whether that means that you're working with an upper grade fourth grader that's got gaping holes in scalability, which unfortunately many of our fourth graders do right now. I think our third graders that started third grade this year were one of the hardest hit grades, because they really missed the two formative grades where a lot of this is supposed to take root and become entrenched so that then they can read to learn. They're still stuck trying to learn to read while they're reading to learn, and it's almost impossible to do both at the same time. So those teachers at those upper grade levels, they don't have this in their wheelhouse. But strangely enough, but when I say this, I mean the code. Like, what do I do if Johnny can't read? You know, how do I cue a kid who can't read? They're used to working on comprehension. Now they've actually got kids who are trying to remember letter sounds. Now, while that is our kind of ball of wax in K1 and 2, we typically work with one hand tied behind our back, which you're going to see as we get started. Because our traditional mindset when it comes to the code is to divvy it out in bits and pieces across multiple grade level years. And the problem with that is a code is a puzzle. You need all of it to really do anything with it. And so not having all of it means that our work is watered down with the kids. Everything we're doing when they read and write across the day is watered down because they don't have anything to read or write with if they're in kinder or first or second, which you're going to see in just a minute. Now, second grade's got a good bit because they get to kind of wrap up with a bow whatever's been taught so far and then deliver those kids to hopefully third grade ready to read. But in current years with the pandemic, they're not necessarily delivered ready to read it. Even before the pandemic, kids who weren't developmentally where they needed to be weren't always finished with that reading process. When we look at what the brain science lets us do, we can do so much more, so much sooner, and then harvest so much more value out of what we're already doing every day. And that's really why this isn't a program. What you're going to see is it's a way to take advantage and cheat the brain systems for learning, to get around an elephant in the room that you may not know is there, which is the most fun part for me. So I'm going to jump in. That was a little bit of a open-ended introduction, but my focus with saying all of that is that we're all in the same boat. We're just looking at this from different sides of the table, whether you're hole plugging, whether you're building the foundation from the beginning in kinder or even pre-K. Raise your hand if you teach pre-K. So I didn't even ask that. Okay. Either way you look at this, from whatever vantage point you have, the code is something kids need deep in the gut. And we all have to use that code as a bridge to get where we're going to teach everything else that kids need. And the code can be one of the hardest things to teach. We're going to turn it into the easiest thing today. This is a group that is, if you're not already in it, raise your hand if you're in the Facebook group. Okay, that's great. If you're not in the Facebook group, you're going to want to join this group. It's over a year old, maybe a year and 2 months, and there's about 53,000 or so in there now. But it is an amazing place where teachers share all of their creative ideas, videos, pictures. There's a whole file in there with uploads or downloads that you can use in your classroom to play with all the things we're going to be talking about. And it's also the best place to ask questions, not just to get ideas, but to ask questions. I'm always in awe of the things that teachers post in there, the things that they come up with. Because this isn't a program, it's your tool set to put meaning where there wouldn't be. The things that flourish from that are going to look completely different from one classroom to another. The reading capability will be consistent in terms of what you're able to do or how you're able to deliver it. But the things that you creatively come up with to make this your own, that's going to vary. So having a hub like this where you can see all the ways teachers play, it just adds to that fertile ground of your own kind of imagination, how you want to make this look in your classroom. So I would love for you to get in there, share your ideas, what you're doing, and then certainly follow up with me after this, because this is the best place to ask me questions or the group. And I'm happy to, chime in and answer anything that pops up after we're done today. If you want to share any pictures on social media, I am going to do a drawing. I'll probably pick 5 winners from today between the online group and this group. So if you post a picture on whatever you're on, or even in the Facebook group, you can even post it in there. That's just a good way to enter for that. So I'm going to go ahead, and you can find this group, by the way, in your download. I'll show you where that's going to be in a minute. You can also find it just by going to Google and just type in Secret Stories Facebook group. If you end up on the page, that's the wrong place to be. I mean, you can follow it for sure, because I post things there that I don't post in the group. But the group is where everybody is. So I sometimes will see teachers posting all these great ideas, but they're hollering in the wind to themselves because nobody can answer them on the page. So you want to make sure you're actually in the group so everybody can interact with you. Now, this is your packet that I want to make sure you know how to get to. It is also in the Zoom link that you got, but I don't know if you can access the Zoom link after today since it's not reoccurring. So I'm going to tell you how to get to it. And you'll also see all kinds of other things here, but the most important thing is going to be your packet. If you go to secretstories.com or katiegarner.com, either one, you're going to see at the top of that website, workshops. It's one of the drop-down options, one of the window options at the top. If you click on the drop-down menu, session handout packet is one of the options. If you select that, it's going to take you to a packet that's about 75 pages. It's a big packet. It has clickable links throughout it. So in order to activate the links, you want to drag it to your desktop, and then you can dig deeper and kind of go into things in much more depth than we're going to, because we do have a full day, which is awesome. But there's so much to play with in this pack. The pack's going to mirror my presentation. It's going to be very similar to my presentation, but with these little clickable arrows that let you dig deeper and go down rabbit holes to see or watch or learn more about things that are interesting to you based on what you teach, what level, what kids, and what needs you have. So make sure you do download this. If you have any trouble finding it, let me know in the Facebook group. I can pop the link over to you. Now, I'm going to actually skip this part, which says Better Alphabet, because we're going to dive into this deeper than I usually get to. I usually use this little part to make sure teachers in a conference know there's this magical thing called the Better Alphabet. And when I say magical, it's because it's the fastest way, not just like in general, the fastest way I'm going to go all the way out and say on planet Earth to get the individual letters and sounds into the heads of a kid. I'm not even going to say 5. You can actually, I wouldn't do this with a 3-year-old. There's absolutely no point. But you could, because they can sing the Itsy Bitsy Spider. And we're using the same area of the brain, which is muscle memory, to capture what's in the Better Alphabet that we use to sing any songs with our kids as they're just starting to play and explore language. Now, I'm not saying go grab a 3-year-old and do this, because there's no point and they don't need to do it. But I am saying it's that easy. Now, there are some tricks with muscle memory. You have to cheat, because muscle memory can get locked in like autopilot. It's like a read-only disk. It's not really helpful for learning in a lot of ways. But this whole session is going to be about not just knowing the brain system for learning, but knowing how to use them to our advantage. So because we have muscle memory, and we're going to look at how this works, because this is a key piece to get us kind of rolling with this backdoor to the brain idea that we're going to talk about. Muscle memory is the fastest way to grab those individual letters and sounds, because it bypasses all developmental issues, language barriers, articulation, working memory. It goes to a different area of the brain. And it's the first example of how we're going to cheat the brain. So instead of just saying you're going to see a slide and a clickable arrow to learn more about it, we're actually going to get to talk about it for about 15 minutes before we officially dive in. So what I want to do is make sure you understand what it is, what it looks like, and how to do it with your kids. I'm going to let this little group of pre-K students demonstrate it. It's only about 15 seconds on this clip because it's from Instagram. But what I want you to notice is the non-conscious retrieval that's occurring, meaning they're singing it, it's coming out, there's no processing time trying to remember cognitively what sound the letters make. It flows right off the lips, tongue, and teeth. But you're also going to see one of the little girls doing this, because she knows that the other key piece to this is something called eye glue. Not just muscle mouth, but eye glue. You got to see what you sing and sing what you see. You want to forge the letter sound connection in the brain, symbol to sound. And if you've looked at or read about the science of reading, because we're going to be talking about that a little bit as well, orthographic mapping in the brain means there's a tight sound symbol connection that's automatic. So sounds and symbols are forged in such a way that when kids see a symbol, the sound pops out. When they hear a sound, they know instantly what symbol represents it, what symbol goes with that speech sound. This is what you'll see happening in these next couple of slides, and it's the easiest way to make it happen, but it's taking a backdoor route. It's just one example of this totally different way we're going to attack these sounds. Now, the rest of the presentation is going to be about what happens when letters come together and don't do what they should. But this is an important piece because it's often missed since there aren't stories about individual letters, and that's because they're not needed. And you'll see why.
But it can also say.
Now, did you hear the C? It can also say, so it said C says, but it can also say, that's because C has both sounds. And the most likely one is the one that comes out of their mouth first, because that's how it's put in. This is the really neat, magical kind of secret sauce there, because they don't just know the individual letters. They can get into the nooks and crannies of every possible thing a letter can say by itself. So we're not talking about phonic sounds, by itself in the most likely order. Because when you're reading and you attack a word, you want to attack it with the most likely sound. So if you see the letter C in a word, you want to try before you would try S. So G, same thing, G, J. Y, not just Y, it can also say E or I by itself without any other letters. So all of that is built into this Better Alphabet progression. Now the trick here is, because with muscle memory, there's a danger spot. And if you've ever sung the 12 months of the year, you know this, or the 7 days of the week, or the 50 nifty states. What happens when kids sing a song, like for instance, 12 months of the year, January, February, March, April, May, June, July, whatever your song is. And you ask the child, what comes before July? What do they have to do to answer your question? Sing it. What happens if they, which they always do, sing past that part all the way to the end because they get caught up in the song. And then you say, okay, so what came before July? And they don't know. What do they have to do? Start over again. And it's almost like they have a read-only disc or it's like they have a little encyclopedia in their head that they can pull out, but it only comes out in one way and it only goes from beginning to end. And only if they're paying very close attention to what it is they're singing can they then answer the question. So it's two parts of the brain working at once. It's the automatic non-conscious part that can just sing and not even know it's singing. Because, sometimes we do that. You ever been singing and like your neighbor just hits you and said, stop singing that song. And you're like, oh, I didn't even realize I was doing it. It's a non-conscious retrieval. It's simple. It's easy. No processing needed. You can sing a song to words you don't even know and you just make them up and it's the same way you sing it every time and they're not even real words because it's not something you're processing or thinking about. It's non-conscious. So if kids are going to use that information, then it's this part of the brain that actually has to tune in to pull it out. Now that's not going to work well for individual letters and sounds because letters by default need to be flipped and flopped and manipulated for the purpose they serve. It's a great way to learn 50 Nifty States because you don't need to be manipulating the states and capitals. You just need a way to recall, like sing it all the way through, get to whatever, Michigan, and then pull out the capital. So that's easy, but not for letters and sounds. But if we know that this is such an easy in, we can look to see why it's a problem. And the reason it's a problem is anything that's encoded pitch, rhythm, and intonation is going to be processed by this earlier developing, more primitive part of the brain, which is good. That's why it's so easy to get in, even to a kid who doesn't know where his own foot is. The problem is, because it didn't take any processing to get in there, no understanding to get in there, it can't be processed when it's there. But if you break that pitch, rhythm, and intonation up so that that song is not one song, it's 26 mini songs, which means it starts over on every single letter. Now they have access to actually pull the sound they want from the letter they need without having to start at A, because it literally starts over on every single letter. Now I'm going to show you what this looks like so you can see what I'm talking about, but this is the neat part about understanding the brain system for learning, because we can take the good parts and then we can pull out the bad and use the things that are going to get us way ahead, but not be stuck with the part that goes with it. So it works really well for the individual letter sounds. I guess you could probably use it for some other, content that you're learning, but for the most part, content in general is fine to learn through music. It's just not fine when the information has to be manipulated constantly. Now, I'm going to show you exactly what this looks like. I'm going to play this video of me doing part of it so you can see this, and then I'm going to show you how kids can retrieve the sound they need from the letter they want without having to go back all the way through. This is just to give you a better idea of a little bit more of it so you can see it. You do not need this video. I made it for COVID because we couldn't tell where kids' eyes were. And the two key pieces with this working to become this forged sound symbol connection in the brain, you have to see what you sing and sing what you see. So you've got to work your lips, tongue, and teeth because it's muscle memory that's going to capture this, but you have to see what you're singing. If kids aren't looking at the letter that they're singing, then what will happen is they'll know all the letter sounds, but they won't have any idea what letters go with them, which means they can't use them to read or write anything. So eye glue and muscle mouth are important. And because with COVID, kids were looking at a screen, you didn't know as a teacher if you're singing this where their eyes were. Even if you're holding up a letter, you don't know that they're looking at it. So I did this and I had the letters superimposed behind me so they couldn't not see them. So I'm just going to play a little bit of it. If you, though, are in your regular classroom, it's really better for you to sing this in real time with your kids, pointing to the actual alphabet anchors in your class, because it shows them where they're going to go to get back to them. The problem with showing things on a video is when the video goes off, so do all the anchor connections. So some kids make the translation and they know, oh, well, those are just up here above the board. But some kids don't connect that the letters above the board are the same letters up here. So if you do have the video and you use it, just let this be only one of the 2 times a day that you're using it. And I do apologize if anybody's not needing individual letter sounds and you're wanting me to get to the meatier stuff. Just keep in mind, ELL kids are going to start over again when they come, and they're going to need to start right at the beginning. So you'd be surprised at whatever grade level you teach when you need that trick in your pocket to pull out and get kids caught up fast with non-English speaking. So I'm going to play this part just really quick. Just play a little bit of it.
A says ah, 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 ah. But he can also say A, 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 A. B says B, 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 B. C says k, 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 k. But it can also say S, 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 S. D says D, 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 D. E says eh, 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 eh. But it can also say E, 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 E. F says G says g, 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 g. But it can also say J, 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 J.
Now I'm going to stop that there, but you notice for the vowels, there was a motion. That's because the vowels are too nebulous. They're too ambiguous to be captured by the muscles. If you play a sport, tennis, golf, even if you play piano, anything that involves body intelligence, muscle memory, you know, where you do it enough that you don't think about it, it's part of your body can just take over. Like a tennis swing is a perfect example. You train to be able to have a fluid motion so that you're not micromanaging every part of that swing. The vowels are they're too close in their production for the muscles to be reliable to capture them. So we need another in. Now I'll explain what that in is when we get to that part, but they're the only letters that have a motion. Normally movement is great. We always want to incorporate that additional angle of learning with movement, not with a Better Alphabet Song. Not with a Better Alphabet Song. Can you guess why? Because this is one of the biggest things I see that's a misconception is like, you know, because Secret Stories isn't a program. So you will be pulling it together with whatever your reading program is. So let's say you've got a reading program that's like B says bear, buh, buh, buh. C says cat, meow, 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 whatever. Folks don't understand like, but why can't we keep doing our bear motion and our meow, meow, cat motion? Why do you think that would be a problem if we're doing the Better Alphabet Song and it's going through muscle memory? Any guesses? It's a tricky question. Any guess? You got it. They'll focus on the movement. When Johnny's acting like a bear, that's so much more cool to look at than the bee. And if everybody's watching Johnny be the greatest bear in the world, then B is gone and the sound is there, but the symbol's not. And the whole idea with orthographic mapping in the brain, which is just a fancy way to say sound symbol connection. See the symbol, make the sound, hear the sound, know what makes it. Like it's just a sound symbol connection forged in the brain. But that symbol's key. So yes, the muscle memory lets us cheat. That's the easy part. The hard part's focusing a bunch of little 5-year-olds on the letter as they're singing it. And that's why I used to do 2 awards, Boys Against Girls, Eye Glue, Muscle Mouth. And I would say, oh, the girls beat the boys yesterday. They got Muscle Mouth and Eye Glue awards. They got to line up first and go to recess first. Come on, boys, I know you can beat them. And the whole point was they've got to work their lips, tongue, and teeth so that this is really getting into the muscles, and they've got to see what they sing and sing what they see. Now, if they're moving around, now they have to do those motions for the vowels because that's what's going to hook them into the sound, and it's going to come from a feeling-based connection that we'll talk about in a bit. But all those other letters are best just focused in on the actual symbol. This is just showing you something we're actually going to talk about more when it comes to these social and emotional connections, which is the back door to the brain that we're going to hit. But the other part of what's in this back door in the brain is, again, this primitive icon-based visual, pitch, rhythm, intonation, all of these things that make up what the Better Alphabet Song is. Anytime you hear a song or even a rhythm, can you clap that back? Okay, let's try it. Hold on, we'll do it this time now that you know you're going to clap it back. Let me do it, and then you can do it immediately after. Good. Now, you didn't have to do math calculations or use your watch to know how many seconds or milliseconds were between each clap. You probably didn't count how many claps there were. I bet nobody could even raise their hand right now and say there were exactly 9 claps. Like, I don't even know how many claps there were. You retrieved that from a different area of the brain. It wasn't your cognitive, figure it out, let's think about it. It was a feeling, not a feeling like I'm sad, I'm happy, but more of a response, like an automatic instinctual response. That's that part of the brain. It's got a different way of recall that's not tied in with developmental readiness or language background or even working memory. It's a very different area of the brain. And that's the area we're hitting for this. The trick is split it apart, because if you sing one cohesive song, it's all locked together as a read-only disc. Now, here's what you're going to see about how kids can pull what they need if they can't remember what a letter says, and they can grab it. And keep in mind, this is not powerful information yet, because at the end of the day, kinder teachers will spend all year trying to teach individual letters and sounds, and kids still can't read anything. You know why? Because those individual sounds that letters make are almost never the sounds they seem to make in actual words when they come together with other letters. Because when that happens, it's called a phonics pattern, and often those are going to be taught in first grade or in second grade, or maybe even not at all. Especially, you know, for some kids, they're doing kindergarten stuff in first grade because they didn't even get their kindergarten skills. So in first grade, they're not doing first grade code stuff. They're not getting the blends and the digraphs or vowel combinations. They're still trying to get the alphabet letters. And then in second grade, they're backtracking, trying to teach what first grade was trying to teach. So now the kid's getting shipped to third grade, ready to read to learn. He hasn't even acquired the whole code yet, because developmental readiness is a real issue in K-1-2. We've got kids who are all over the map in kindergarten. Some of them are ready to just go and do and learn everything, and some of them can't find their own foot. And that's the norm. Like, that's not an unusual year. That's the expectation. That's just developmental readiness. It's just the way it is. So not having to rely on accessing the front door to get in is key. So this teacher posted this in the group, and I loved it because it exemplified exactly what I wanted to show, and with a student that was perfect to show it. She said, in September, this sweet little kindergartner was still 4. And that's because muscle memory is not based on readiness. So it doesn't really, the age doesn't matter. I just try not to say things like, oh, a 3-year-old can do it, because I'm afraid somebody's going to go grab a 3-year-old and force feed them something that's pointless for them to have because they can't use it for any purpose yet. So it's not necessary. But the biology of muscle memory, you know, 3-year-olds can stand like this, just like a 4-year-old can stand like this, just like a 5-year-old can stand like this. It's something that's a feature built in. So it's doable. It's just, I don't want to encourage anybody to actually do it. So, but anyway, this is different. She's in kindergarten. So she's eating, sleeping, and breathing all of these opportunities for reading and writing. So it is important for her. And the teacher said she was 4. She wasn't able to give me any sounds or letters. We sang the Better Alphabet song every day. And you want to do it twice a day, by the way, until mastery. And I would even hear the kids sing on their own when they were partnering. Fast forward to the first week of November and watch what she can do. Can you hear the beautiful dialect? There's a second language spoken at home. Now, it takes about 2 weeks to 2 months, depending on the situation of the learner. Your average kid's going to be pretty much done with their individual letters and sounds at the 2-week mark. Your kids who have some language barriers or some auditory deficits could take that full 2-month mark. But all of that's much better than a whole year being sucked up, trying to teach these individual sounds that actually aren't still advancing you into what you need to be able to read or to write anything. So let's listen to this. And by the way, it's all in random order. So what's interesting is, you know how you do a letter sound assessment and you point to different letters and they have to tell you what it is? Well, she's doing that. But the neat part is listen for where this lives in her brain, because there's no thinking time. And the reason is it's not happening where the brain processes that information. It's non-conscious retrieval. If this were a conscious executive function where kids are typically processing this information, like they're going, like they're thinking about it. They're trying to remember it. They might even be thinking elephant, So it's a process of recall. That's not what's happening here. And you can tell that because there's absolutely no lag. She goes straight from the letter to the sound it makes. Like there's no thinking time. And it's not that that's so impressive. It's because it's coming from the same place you would sing the itsy bitsy spider. Yeah, you didn't have to think about that. It's just, it rolls right off. And that's the really neat part. How about this one? Can we turn that up just a little?
But you can also say a. Yes. Yes. Hello, said yes. He said why said but you can also say E-R-I-R-E.
Yes. What she said at the end is Y says yeah, but it can also say E-R-I or E. Now, here's what has to happen for this to become usable. it has to transfer from back here, this part of the brain that has instant recall but can't apply it for a purpose, to the part of the brain that actually sees its use. Meaning, oh, I know what I get, like that letter's in this word. My name's Bob, and the B that goes B, it's in the name that's my name, that's Bob, and I hear the B sound in the word Bob, and that's why I get it now. The B is in my name because my name is Bob. Like that awareness, that kind of light bulb has to pop on for this information to be used. So it has to be transferred from this back door to the front in order to put to practice the reading and the writing. The good part is what spurs that is what we do already all day long. We're engaging with text all day long. We're reading, we're writing, we're doing our morning message. We're having them find their little cubbies with their name tags. We're looking at the math directions. We're looking at the menu choices. Or if you're in an upper grade, you're going through your content areas where text is everywhere and they're trying to read it. They're trying to write with it. So we've got already built into the day lots of opportunities to see how this is supposed to be applied. We just have kids that don't have the skills to apply it. Like they don't have the skills. We can read and write all day long, but if our kids are learning a letter a week, then they don't have the letters they need to actually do any of the reading and the writing. And if they don't have the phonics skills, even more so. So think about it like a key. If you give a 3-year-old or a 4-year-old a key and they don't know what a key does to a door, they don't have the cause effect yet, they could come up with lots of creative ways to play with the key. Like if I were a kid, I'd hold it up to the light and watch it. Like I could do this with it and it will make like a sparkly thing on the wall because it'll like reflect the light. Or you could put it in your pocket with some change and make it go jingle, jingle, jingle like a bell. But I wouldn't think to put it in a door until I understood its purpose. Now, if I'm around you and you're getting in and out of places all over the place, you got this really cool key ring and you're always using those keys to open the cabinet in the basement and the closet and the door. Well, at some point, depending on how with it I am, I'm going to think, I got one of those, and I'm going to pull it out of my pocket and look at it and go, this opens. So I'm going to get what it's for by being around its use all the time. But it wouldn't help me to be around its use if I didn't have the key. If I don't have the key, I'm just watching you do cool stuff with something I don't have anyway. The key is no pun intended. The key is to give kids access to move these skills through the back door so that every kid can have access to it. And then let their light bulbs kind of pop in as their ability allows. But at least we know we're getting those skills delivered. We're not standing at the front door, higher level processing. You need to understand it. Think how hard it is, for example, if you try to teach the letter B with a ball, because normally you do, like, B, ball, but think about this for a minute, how much trickier that would have to be cognitively. It's why it takes all year in kindergarten, because first you have to know what a ball is. If I don't speak English, there's problem number one. Once I know that's a ball, now I have to segment. I have to be able to segment the sounds to know which sound is the B. Is it the B or the ah or the l? Once I segment b, all, now I know, okay, I got the sounds separated. It's the b sound that I want. So I've got to do all that just to get the sound from the picture after I segment and then isolate which sound I want and then remember that that's the sound I need. So that's a lot of steps. We don't have to do any of that if we take it in through this back door. Now it's just there. And the only thing we have to do is give them opportunities to use it. This is so interesting to me because there's a quote, and we're going to see this a few times. There's a Harvard-trained neuroscientist. Her name's Mary Helen Immordino Yang. And her scope of work is that it's neurobiologically impossible for kids to think deeply about things they don't care about. So if you can trigger them caring about it, they become obsessed with it. And when kids are obsessed with things, they never stop talking about it. It just like rings in their head all day long. It's hard to care about letters and sounds. It's hard to care about phonics. Even we don't care about phonics. It's literally just a means to an end to become a reader, to become a writer. It's not to become a phonics master. Like that's not the goal. It can feel like that nowadays because we're learning all about trigraphs and digraphs and diphthongs and triphthongs and scribbles and nasalizations and fricatives and so many terms. I think we should all be automatically honorary speech pathologists at this point because there's so much knowledge. But at the end of the day, the end user is a kid who's trying to learn to read. Like that's the end user for all of that information. So having buckets to deliver that to these 5-year-olds or struggling upper grade readers, that's the key. That's the hard part. I mean, that's where the hard work comes in. Once we wrap our head around all the information, how do we deliver it to Johnny who's eating his shoe and licking the carpet? That's the key piece. What I love is when we can trigger in the brain this need to know on the part of the learner. So this to me really exemplifies this as well, because this little kindergartner decided to write the lyrics to the Better Alphabet song. And boy, was he very specific that, like, look at this. A says, ah, 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 but it can also say A, 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 and he knows the AY secret, the AY secret, because they're like Fonzie, they're just too cool. So they stick up their thumbs and they go, A, and that's the sound they make, which by the way, is why he spelled A-Y, just interesting. Because simultaneously to the Better Alphabet, you're tossing out secrets. You're not waiting. You're not waiting, because teaching T is harder if you don't know why it never does what it should. You know, it does. It's so funny to me. I'll see this all the time. Oh, I'm doing the Better Alphabet and we're going to do an intensive study of the alphabet before we start talking about the secrets. So we usually get to the secrets like in February or March. You can't intensively study the alphabet when it never actually does anything in real words that are like what it does in the alphabet. Like the only way to intensively study the alphabet is to just stare at the wall where you have it hanging. Because as soon as those letters jump into real words, all bets are off and entirely different sounds come out. So you can't, it's like studying a horse outside of any habitat, like no grass, no food, no interaction. It's just a horse in a box. How can you study something in such isolation? It's not possible. So the easiest way to teach a T is to have in your back pocket the reason why it never does what it's supposed to. Because, you know, we can tell kids, T says turtle, but it never will because of words like this and them and those and that and they and the. It everywhere you look, on every book, on every page, on every line of every book of every page, you'll see a T. And I guarantee you it won't be saying t. It'll be saying because there'll be an H with it. And that's a first grade skill. So what does the poor kindergarten teacher do trying to reinforce T says t when literally it's unreinforced every time they turn around? It's so hard. And yet it's so easy if you give kids an if not then this, because our brain is a pattern making machine. So it's how we learn. Like if I can't park here, I'll park over there. If I can't park over there, I'm going to have to go next door and park at McDonald's. If I can't find a spot over there, you're going to have to pick me up because I'm not ruining my shoes. So we have this whole hierarchy of most likely, next most likely, if all else fails. That's the brain system for learning. Not it does, it doesn't. Not rule exception. We don't pull in and not be able to park and go, oh no, what will I do? I'm blank. I have no idea. Like we've got a backup instantly. So the backup is, yeah, T does say t, but you know what? Not when it's with this other letter, because you know how, well, actually, let me ask you this first. Raise your hand if your kids can tattle. Okay, anybody have kids that cannot tattle? If you do, I would love to know that. Okay, all kids know how to tattle. Raise your hand if your kids could tell you, or a sub, which kids are not allowed to sit together. If they're able, no matter how young or how old or what language they speak, could they let you or a sub know they can't sit together? Raise your hand if you think they could actually say why. Like they'd know why, like, because they're going to spit, because they play rough, because they always talk, because they out. Yeah. So they're just things they understand. T and H are not allowed to sit together ever. They're not allowed to sit together. Just like you two. I've split you up how many times today already? You guys remind me of these two, because no matter how many times they're split up, they don't listen. Every chance they get together side by side. And you know why they can't sit together? Because when they do, they always stick out their tongues and they go, and that's the sound they make, which is why they're not supposed to sit together, but they don't listen. So if you pick up any book and you look at any page, guess who you're going to see over and over? T and H. Now, there's not a kid that you couldn't tell that to and then show this to. It doesn't matter that they don't know what a T is or an H. That's not the relevant part. What's relevant is if they see this symbol, would it prompt them to go? And the answer to that would be yes. Even a 3-year-old could look at this without even understanding what it's for and go. Now, that's called sound a symbol. You saw this symbol and a sound popped out. What if we reversed it and I just said, could you go point to the letters that aren't allowed to sit together? Because they always go, you could easily identify the culprit that made that sound because it's clearly depicted here. That's the perfect sound wall. Not tongues, not mouths going, you know, the 44 mouths on the wall. I'm not criticizing that because I know some schools and districts are required to have it up. And I will say with COVID, it was helpful with the masks on and you're online and kids can't see your face, and it's got its place. And it absolutely is helpful if you're working with structural abnormalities or structural speech issues that need to have diagnostic corrections in a small group, if you're a speech pathologist, but as a teacher trying to help a kid spell or read a word, finding the right tongue or mouth and the letters under it, using a mirror for kids to see what their mouth looks like as they then try to compare it to the 45 other mouths on the wall, is a very complicated multi-step task. Tim Shanahan wrote a wonderful blog post about how that would actually look if it were possible to be done. And since that time, a lot of the mouth pictures now, instead of being called like a sound wall to read and spell, it's more a sound wall to help support kids understanding their mouth positions. And I can get behind that. But for reading and spelling, it's got to be instant. And you want to go with what they know. If a mirror has to be involved, that's a whole nother level of chaos that kids would enjoy for all kinds of other things. So bottom line is orthographically mapping that sound to this symbol. That's the goal of the game, because all we want to do is open the alphabet up to include another sound. So that when you go on your morning message to write the word this or that or the, you're actually doing something that connects back to what kids understand. Because otherwise there's only 26 letters in that alphabet and none of them say. So how do they get that sound when they want to write it? How do they figure out that sound when they want to read it? They're going to have to. Even in pre-K, you're not going to get away from this being part of the text that's all around. So if every time they see that T, they go, they'll be wrong 100% of the time. And the brain's a pattern making machine. So you know what it does with something that's not reliable? It throws it away because it's use it or lose it. If I can't use it, I don't need it. So it tosses it, which means you have to keep teaching it. You have to keep forcing them to know these individual letter sounds that are harder for them to get when they don't actually work. But what's really cool is when you can have credibility and you can say, look, T really does say T, just not when it's with H. That way you're consistent. It's not a just is, just as, you have to just remember, like it actually makes sense. It changes everything from the brain's perspective. Now, I didn't mean to get that far into what I was saying. I shouldn't have even gone off on that tangent. My focus here was supposed to be just that when kids get really connected with something that's meaningful to them, they're unstoppable and they start driving their own learning. So I love that this little guy was trying to write the whole song. This is a teacher. She's doing something called a letter run, which is really fun, but it's basically the step after the better alphabet. And I promise to get to the heavy duty hard stuff in just a second. But this is interesting because the letter run is supposed to be skip the name of the letter, because by that point they already know it, because better alphabet teaches the letter name, the sound. This is just see it and say it, see it, say it, see it, say it, see it, say it. And with the letter run, you can go in any order and do it to any tune. So you can do a short vowel version like this, while you're pointing to the letters. You could do the long vowel version, you could do it to happy birthday. My vowel cues are off. You can do it backwards, which I can't do I don't have the letters up here, but if I had the letters up here, I could. These guys are doing it in any way they want. So they're doing it to the tune of the normal letter run, which is just the ABC song, but they're going all out of order. And I just like kind of showing how this kind of builds this ability to see a symbol, make a sound, see a symbol, make a sound, see a symbol, make a sound. Because that's what a reader's going to be doing. Oh, I think we need our much more volume. She's going backward, which is fun. And I've seen it to Star Wars. One teacher posted her class doing it that way. And in the letter run, by the way, you don't get to make all the sounds for the letters like you do in the better alphabet because it's too fast. It's supposed to be mimicking what you do when you come to text and attack. So it's only the most likely sound you're attacking with. But there is a long or a short vowel version, because if you're doing the long vowel version, every time you hit a vowel, you only make the long sound. That's why that one's abaca de efaga. The short vowel one is abaca de effaga. So this is really fun to play with, but what it does is it builds speed and stamina and automaticity so that kids are tightening that connection of that sound symbol relationship. but in a way that makes them go, can we do it again? Can we do it again? Instead of something that you're doing that's, rote work, skill-based focus. Now, I already talked about this, but the gap between what we know about the brain and how we teach kids to read is wide, because again, we start with the smallest pieces of the puzzle that are the least likely successful for reading, because that's the easiest thing. Those are the individual letter sounds. But we have to kind of be aware that nobody wants to play with half a puzzle. Like you wouldn't, if I gave you a third of a puzzle only, and I said, next year, I'll give you the next third. And then in year 3, I'll give you the last third. What are you supposed to do with a third of a puzzle? It doesn't come together to mean anything. It may not even come together at all, because some of the pieces you need aren't even necessarily going to be there. Who wants to even bother trying to play with it? It's no fun. Like if I can't access the sounds I need to tell the story I want to write, or I can't access the patterns I need to figure out the story I want to read, it's just not even fun to play anymore. It's interesting because teachers don't throw away much, but you know what we do throw away? Puzzle with missing pieces. Because we know like nobody's going to want to use it. Like I wouldn't even make them. It'd be cruel to make them sit there and try to put something together knowing 20 pieces are missing and it'll never actually happen. So the code is nothing but a puzzle, and you really do need all of it to do anything with it. And if we think about it like that, we can't hold the T off. Now, the weird thing is people think the TH is harder than the T, and it is if it's taught as a digraph. It's not if it's taught as 2 letters that are not allowed to sit together. If you teach it that way, they're going to learn that before they know the T. And I don't mean they'll know that that's a T and an H. They don't have to know the letter names to just get started with connecting that sound symbol relationship to the story. So you don't have to worry like, oh, but until they know that's a T and that's an H, I can't talk about the T and the H. No, you can, because the orthographic mapping process is sound symbol connection. They'll get the names of the letters. That's going to happen through muscle memory. That'll take about 2 weeks to 2 months because the muscles have to get it. You walk out the door with something that makes sense. If you tie back to what they already know, you get to own it by default. You're not really teaching them about not getting along and sticking your tongue out. They've been doing that long before they met you. You're just tying what's already deeply understood to this brand new thing they've never seen. And you know where the heavy lifting is happening? On the wall. Because the hard part is, how do I remember which ones do what? They don't have to. That's what a sound wall is for. A sound wall is a place kids can go to independently read and spell without you, to be able to look at a symbol and figure out the sound it makes on their own, or to be able to hear a sound in a word they want to write, like that, and be able to look at the wall and see what can I use to put that symbol down. Oh yeah, they're the ones with their tongue out. That's what a sound wall is supposed to be for, a place to go sound symbol to get either or for reading or writing. So the heavy lifting is done with the poster. They don't have to remember which one does what, because that's what this will do until it starts to work its way into their own thinking network through use. But you don't have to worry that they don't know the names of the letters yet to make sense of what's happening. If you just refuse to do that and only tell them T says T, and until they mastered that, you're not going to talk about this. You're going to take 3 times longer to teach that because it won't ever actually work. You're stuck. You're kind of unreinforcing it all the time without trying to, because everything they see in text, it's going to show the opposite of what you're telling them to do, which is the T sound. If you give an if not, then this, their brain can go, oh, so she is not lying. Like T really does say T. It's just not when it's with that guy. Then they go, Th. That means everything's hunky-dory in the brain. Like everything you're doing is it's consistent. It's reinforced. It's actually what they expected it to do. And it makes everything so much smoother because our brain isn't hit with all these curveballs that otherwise the English language loves to throw at us. Now, here's another example. If you've got a little kid named Howard in his room, he's in big trouble with a traditional scope and sequence. And your scope and sequence is great as a safety net, meaning your scope and sequence shouldn't feel like handcuffs that you can't go past. It's just important, and it's especially important with phonics, because you do want explicit, systematic, sequential instruction. Specifically, you want to follow your district's curriculum, scope, and sequence of whatever the reading series is. But when I say follow it, there's no research, zero research, and everybody agrees on this, that dictates what sequence phonics skills should be taught in. There's absolutely no established sequence of what the order should be, none. Which begs the question then, why is it so critical to be sequential if there's no research that says there's a sequence it must be taught in? And the reason is accountability. You need to make sure every single piece of the code is accounted for, because we can't be willy-nilly and just hope first grade does whatever kinder didn't do and second grade picks up some things and then you're ready for third. So we need to have that check system, but it can't tie your hands, because if it does, Howard's not going to find out why he's Howard until the end or middle of second grade, because that ow sound is key for him being able to spell his name or to read his name. If he doesn't understand how to get that sound, he's got to just memorize a random sequence of letters that he does not actually hear. Because what he hears is ha-awa, arada. He's got 2 phonics patterns in his name. And he doesn't know those yet, because they'll both be delivered in first and second respectively. So his name's ha-awa, arada, which has got to be so frustrating for him, because that's a long name. And he's just got to write random letters that he doesn't hear, doesn't see. He just has to put them down anyway. And not just Howard, but every kid who has to read the word how, which is every kid, because that's going to be one of your sight words. I mean, that's a word that's going to be expected for kindergartners even to learn. And it's going to look like ha'awa. And it's so easy. How many of your kids know when they play rough, they're going to get hurt? And how many kids know when they get hurt, they say, ow? Like, that's not tricky stuff. They already knew it before we even said it. And there are 2 letters that always play rough and they always get hurt. And they say, ow! And that's the sound they make. But you know what? Flying overhead is superhero O. You don't know about him yet, but he is their all-time favorite superhero ever. If he ever flies by, they'll stop dead in their tracks, like no matter what they're doing, and they'll go, oh, because they love him. That's important, because that's the default. If not, then this. Words like slow, blow, flow, glow. You don't want to leave the brain hanging with something that doesn't actually work and no logical explanation as to why. So most likely, next most likely. But every kid can have access to it right now. So it's not just Howard that's going to go, oh, thank goodness, ow. And then AR is another secret that I'll tell you as we keep going. But he's got that, and every other kid who needs to write how or now or about or around or flower or cow, all those words have this sound in it. And you know, the option is teach them something they already know or memorize all those words. You know how many words you'd have to memorize between the start of school and when the phonics scope and sequence in second grade finally gives them this piece of the code? Think how many words they're going to need to know, to recognize, to read in that 2-year span that have an OU or W sound. There's hundreds. And if they don't have the key they need to unlock those words, they got to just memorize those words. And we've got some kids who will, because their parents are super devoted and they'll sit there and flash that card 3,000 times in their face, or they're just lucky they learn fast. We have other kids, you could flash sight cards at them 4,692 times, and then Monday comes and it's like they've never seen them before. And you're the only one flashing those sight cards because nobody at home is even knowing what you're working on. And those are the kids that suffer the most, because that's the unlevel playing field when everything's based on use it or lose it for skill access. You don't have to memorize what makes sense. When something makes sense, you take it and run with it. Like if I know the ow sound, give me any word. I don't care what it is. Give me cow. Give me now. Give me about, give me around. Like I just throw me a word. Let me see what I can do with it. Because I've got the key I need to play with it, to tinker with it. But if I have to memorize these words and you give me a different word that I don't know that word. It's like a cocktail party. Like I don't know you, and that's a cocktail approach a lot of our upper grade struggling readers have. They don't have tools under their belt. They don't attack text. They look at it and say, I don't know that word. And they'll just look at you when they don't know the word. They don't like roll up their sleeves and try to figure it out. They just look at you. You know immediately when they don't recognize the word, because that's when they just stare at you like they're out of options. And they're right. They don't know the word and they don't have the tools to attack it. So their smartest bet is to look at you, because what else are they going to do? Like they can't attack it with tools they don't have. So it's just so much more work for so much less gain when we have this other way to go. And I couldn't get away with saying any of this if we weren't coming at this from a different brain perspective. If this didn't tie back to what kids already know, then there would be a reason this takes that many years to get, because it's a vowel combination and it's one of the more complex ones because there are multiple sounds that can be made. And prior to this, we would need to cover the digraphs, and that can be complicated as well until kids understand all of the consonant sounds. If this was pure phonics going through the front door, you have to slow it down and split it apart and keep your fingers crossed and practice it a lot and hope it sinks in. But when you can connect back to what kids already know, what drives their own behavior every day, they get this leg up they should never have with stuff they've never even seen. So it literally is like shifting the reality of what kids can do and when it can happen. And it's so exciting to see the hardest thing to teach become not just the most fun, but the easiest. The more pieces of the puzzle they have and the faster they can get them, the more sense what we're doing every single day in our classroom makes. And you'll see why. Oh, and the more fun it is too. And you'll see why as we do this little activity, which is going to be super hard to do here, but we're going to try because it's valuable. So if you could pair up with at least a couple of people, so that you have at least 3 people in your group. I wouldn't do more than 3 because it's too hard in rows to see each other unless you turn around. But I do want you to really do this because it's a huge paradigm shift. It's so worth it and you will love it. So one of you needs to be the writer. So if you could right now take 1 minute to figure out who your group is, and then whoever the writer is, put your pencil on your head so I can see that you're the writer. The last group ready is going to have to demonstrate the musical exercises at the end of the day. So don't be last. Okay, I don't see writers in this middle section. If you're, and by the way, the writers don't have to do anything other than write. You don't have to think. So don't worry if you're the writer that you're worried. Okay, perfect. Now, if you're the writer, this is the only thing you're going to do without your group's help. Just make an outline of the brain that's about 3/4 of the page. And it's fine if it just looks like a lumpy circle. That's not a problem. Just a lumpy circle, brain-like shape, taking up 3/4 of your sheet of paper. Super fast, just lumpy circle. Everybody has their brain? Okay, next one. We're going to do this really quick. As a group, pick 10 letters and write them anywhere inside the brain. Any 10 letters, just write them really fast in the brain and agree on the letters as a group. About 4 more seconds. 2 more seconds. So if you're missing some letters, just throw a B, a D, and a K down and call it a day. All right, next thing. Now, if you're missing some letters, just pick something fast because the next thing you're going to do is pick any high frequency words, any 5 high frequency words. They do not need to be comprised of the letters that you picked. So they're totally separate from the letters. Write them in and around the letters in the brain. So anywhere they fit in the brain, write 5 high frequency words, any ones you want at whatever grade level you are. Okay, if you're not done yet, just grab another word fast, throw it down on the page. Okay, and this again, it's all as a group. So the writer hopefully is not going rogue and just picking all their own letters and words. Everybody gets a say. Okay, now outside of your brain, so this doesn't go inside, it goes outside of your brain. Decide as a group what your favorite animal is and then sketch it quickly anywhere in the margin. It doesn't have to be pretty. Okay, put the finishing touches on your animal. Okay, now here's the next thing we're going to do. And actually, before we do it, this is an important thing because it's going to keep you from cheating. And it's not that I think you're a cheater. It's just that everybody's tempted to cheat at this next point. So I'm going to make sure that's not a temptation for you because we're going to do what's called an independent animal verification. Because you're going to be tempted to change your animal in a minute. And you won't be able to do that if there's a witness that knows what your animal was supposed to be. So whether or not it's recognizable is not a problem. But what you're going to do is in a minute, when I say go, you're going to show your animal to any other group and they're going to tell you what they think it is. If they're right, then you're good to go. If they're wrong, just say, no, it's not a turtle, it's a pig. And then they'll just say, okay, thank you. And then you still have a witness. You're just not a good drawer. But okay, go. Okay, so now here we go. This is what you're going to do. This is where you might have been tempted to cheat, but now you can't because somebody out there knows what your animal is actually supposed to be. So you can't change it now. using only the 10 letters that you know, because that's the brain, that's your brain on the paper. And what's inside of that is what you know. So using only those 10 letters and those 5 high frequency words, you are going to write what your animal is and tell me why you like it so much. But you can only use the letters you picked and the words that you have. And you cannot pull your words apart and use their letters. Those words are sight recognition only because that's what they're being delivered as. You cannot name your animal Bob. You have to tell me what your animal actually is, if it's a cow or a duck or a turtle. Try to use complete sentences if you can. Okay, I'm going to stop you for a minute now. Take a second to take your book, take your notebook or your paper for a minute, and I want you to put it under your chair just for a quick second. I know you're in the middle of figuring it out, but put it under your chair for a second. So whatever you've got your animal drawn on, put it under your chair so you're not tempted to mess with it first. Okay. Is that me? Oh. Now, on a scale of 1 to 10, showing me fingers like 1, 5, or 10, 1 being the hardest, 10 being like so easy. I probably should reverse that, right? Should 1 be the easy, 10 be the hardest? Okay, so 1 is easy. If you thought this was super easy, like you're already done, you've got 2 complete sentences describing words, the whole thing, you're going to show me 1. If you thought this was virtually impossible based on whatever letters you had and whatever animal you drew, you're going to show me a 10. And if you were kind of making some good headway, but not simply, then a 5. What do you think? How was it? Just in that little bit that you got? Okay. I see most 10s. I do see a couple 5s and 6s. Any 1s? Anybody have a perfectly easy time? What was your animal? A cow. And what, did you have all the letters? You called it a moo. Okay. That's actually very clever. And that's exactly the way kids would think, which is smart. But if I said to you, but no, I want you to tell me what it's actually called, what would you tell me? No, but I mean, if I said, I know, but I need you to write it, just sound it out. You know what her answer as an adult would be? With what, ma'am? What am I sounding this? I told you I don't have a C, an O, or a W. What do you mean sound it out? What do I sound it out with? I'm telling you right now, I don't have that. I don't know that. That's how kids would feel if you needed to write the word the or cow or she or her. All of these sounds that have letters that aren't part of the alphabet, or not letters, sounds that aren't part of the abacad effiga alphabet. How do they do that? And yet we will often tell them when they say like, I don't know how to spell that, just sound it out. Or I could also tell you, just do your best. I need you to write that it's a cow. So I like that you know the cow says moo, but I do need you to go ahead and try to write the word cow for me. And when you say, I don't know how to write it, that's okay, just do your best. Again, like with what? What do I do my best with? I don't have the letters in the word cow. They just don't know how to say that. So they can't answer us back in that way. But if you really think about it from their perspective, how much value do you get out of doing something you don't have the tools you need to do it with? Like you are getting a little value, but it's exposure value, not experience value. It's exposure because you're running through the motions of what it would feel like to write the word if you could, right? Like if I could have a C, an O, or a W, I could write the word cow, but since I don't, I'll play around and tell you a cow says moo, and at least that's something interesting, right? And I got to write the word moo, so that was good. So she actually did get some good value out of this because she had at least enough to work with to get around what she didn't have. But some of you held up 10 fingers, which means you weren't getting anywhere. So you didn't literally, you were just blockaded. Like at least they had what you needed for moo. What if you didn't have what you needed for moo? Yeah, you'd have been a 10. And I will see a lot of times teacher groups just stare. When I do this in a district PD and I'm down there and walking around, you'll see teachers sometimes just staring at their paper like kids do. And when you come over and you're like, well, how are you doing? We don't know what to write. And that's what our kids say. I don't know what to write. What they sometimes mean is like, I don't have anything to write with. Like I don't own. Now, some kids don't have a problem with that. They'll just copy the color words. They'll copy the name tags. And then they'll tell you, my story is about a Martian and a duck. And the Marsha went to because they're literally not even aware of what they know they don't know. It's the kids who are a little bit more with it that know they don't know what they need to know that get upset, that get worried, and that start trying to change their animal. If I knew she was going to make us write, I wouldn't have drawn a pelican. I would have made a cat, but I didn't know she was going to make us write about our picture. Like they're very aware of what they know they don't know, and they realize I don't have what I need to do this. And so they get nervous. The kids who don't know enough, ignorance is bliss. If you don't know what you don't know, you're fine. Like you'll just write until the cows come home. No pun intended. So, but the real kind of thing to kind of keep in mind with this, oh, and I like this too. This person said, I loved the presentation. The brain drawing activity was a real eye opener as to why kids shut down or hit a wall. I thought I picked strategic letters and words until I wanted to spell dog. She said, too bad I didn't put cat. You know, this was the luck of the draw for us because you got to just pick any letters and then pick any picture. And then the luck of the draw dictated how well that went together. For kids, they've got what they've got. And whatever that is, that's what they have to use to read and write across the entire day. So all the pockets of time you have carved out during the day where they are either engaged in reading or engaged in writing, it is only as valuable as what they bring to the table to do it with. The more they bring to the table, the more value they take away from that activity because they're able to use the little bit they have to engage to a point, apply it, reinforce it. Like you got to reinforce the m sound and the oo sound. And then I got to say to you, well, why did you put moo? And you got to say, well, because I don't know how to spell cow. And then I get to say, well, what do you hear first? And so I know exactly where to pinpoint my teaching because I can see exactly where she is to know where she needs to go. But if you, let's say, had pig and you didn't have a P-I-R-G, so I come to your paper and you're just sitting there going, I don't know, I can't write pig. You're really not getting anything out of this. You're getting to watch her do it. Like you can look, it's like eating, it's like a show. You're eating the popcorn and watching the show and seeing what this would look like if you had some skills under your belt, but you're not actively engaged in doing it. So when you guys walk away from the table, she walks away with a little more than she had to start with. You walk away with exactly what you had to start with because you didn't have enough to actually engage with the activity. And unfortunately, that's the norm in K1 because we know they don't have the code and yet we are reading and writing across the day, which we should be. But obviously, the more we can give them, every extra piece of the code is power. Sometimes in a PD, what I'll say is, would it help you if you had just one more letter? Like if you could just have one more letter that now in retrospect, you realize you don't have, would it be helpful? And everybody's like, yes. So I say, okay, you can borrow from another group as long as they're not using it. And everybody scatters around looking for the K or looking for the L or looking for the P. That's how much power is in every piece of the code. That owl sound is everything for Howard. But it's also everything for kids who are going to need to read and write words like about, around, cow, flower, house, all the way up until the middle of second grade when they'll be finally let in on the OUOW phonics pattern. Way too little, way too late, because they have to do way too much to work around not having it for those 2 years until they get it. And if it's as easy as tying it back to what you say when you get hurt, why wouldn't we give it to them? Like there's literally no logical reason not to. Give them something that clearly is a key power piece to everything they're going to be doing all day long. Like, and every extra piece is one more piece of the power that they need to really plug in and pull full value out of these reading and writing activities. And that's really the neatest thing. That's already built in. Like we're already reading and writing across the day. Tons of time spent engaging with text across the day. Our kids just don't have anything to read or write with at the primary grades. Now, if you teach in an upper grade level, you could have kids in 3rd, 4th, or 5th grade who are in a similar position because they know everything about reptiles and they could talk your ear off about reptiles. But when it's time to write about reptiles, you get they're fun, they're good, I like them, they're big. And you're like, Johnny, you're a reptile expert. You need to tell me all the cool stuff you know about. The reason he's not is he doesn't know how to he can't build it. He doesn't have the blocks he needs to build that, to put that together. He has to rely on whatever sight words you give him. It, girl, she, can, boy, brown, big. Like whatever words you give them are often what they have to try to figure out how to put together to say something about whatever the journal topic is. And that's not going to keep them writing. What keeps them writing, and by the way, writing is just reading in disguise. That's all this is. Everything you put down on paper, it sounds simple connections. It's even Steven. If I can put the word ow on paper, then guess what I can do in a book? Ow. And I can also do ow. And I could even do ows because the OUOW is locked together in the brain. They're not two separate skills on two different workbook pages. It's OUOW. They both play rough and go ow. Just like Susie and Sarah always play with their hair and get in trouble. Like these are the ones that do it. Here's the behavior that they do. So they're already locked together. This little girl wanted to write about her vacation house. Now, that's not a word that was on the word wall, but didn't matter. She just built it. She built it with the blocks that she had. And she didn't have all the correct blocks. Like she didn't have the ATION block, because there's a secret for SION, ATION. She didn't have that one yet, but that's okay. She could build it. She had the sh, and then she could just sound out the in. So she had what she needed to put it together. And that's a good x-ray of what she's got as a reader. That shows us as a reader, what could she read? Because if she can put it together to write, she could take it apart to attack text with. Now for my, she knows sneaky Y, which you'll learn in a bit. For vuk, a, there's that too cool sound, shin, and then house. Now what's interesting is she spelled the word house wrong, but she's only in TK, which is transitional kindergarten. She hasn't had any text experience yet, or at least whatever little she's accumulated as she started to pick up certain sounds. Until she's seen the word house at least 3 times, it's not going to register in her head, oh, but it's this one that I need. But you know what's going to help that process along? The fact that she can read the word house. Because if she could get the ow sound to write the word house, even though it's spelled wrong, spelling's harder because you've got choices. And those choices are going to be tempered by what visually looks familiar. And then there's some little spelling rules you can give her to help. Like it's usually OW if it's at the end versus OU if it's in the middle. But I probably wouldn't give her that in transitional kindergarten necessarily. I just love that she has a block that makes that sound. And she can use that block to find out or figure out words to read, or she can use that block to build words that she wants to say. Now, what I would do is when she comes up and reads it to me, I might pick that as my point and say, I love that you were able to build this. This is amazing that you could put these words together. You know what? Since you already know the grown-up secret about the ow sound in the word house, I'm just going to tell you, the one that grown-ups use for this word, like the grown-up one that we use is the other one. Do you know what the other one is? The O-W. Yeah, that's the one we use. That's like the grown-up way to spell it. But you already know the grown-up sound in it. So that's awesome. So I'm just going to tell you that's the grown-up. That's the grown-up way to spell it, is with the OU. But you don't really have to do that. I wouldn't probably worry about doing that necessarily, because I know as she reads more, which clearly she can because I can see this, that reading is going to be a much better teacher than I am. Reading is the best teacher if kids have what they need to actually read. The problem is we don't realize the value of reading being a good teacher because kids can't read because they don't have the whole code yet. So they're not getting that automatic kind of best teacher connection as an avid reader. You can't read if you don't have the code. So it's like a circle that's a problem. Reading is the best teacher, but if you don't have the code, you can't read. And since they don't have all the phonics code till the end of 2nd grade, and that's if they're on grade level, then they're not avidly reading, which means we have to do everything manually. And that works for kids who have parents who are also helping doing it manually. But for kids who are on their own, there's nowhere near enough. And that playing field's just, it used to be uneven. Now it's like it's almost vertical now in terms of where our lower guys are and where our higher guys are, because so many kids got nothing. I mean, they got nothing. They weren't even getting logged on. They weren't getting anything. So it's that divide has grown to an extreme level. Now, this is a kindergarten class in November. This is a Title I school in Cincinnati. And I just want you to notice what they're not doing. If you've ever seen beginning writers write, you're used to hearing something constantly. Notice what you don't hear in this clip. And I'm going to ask if we could turn the volume up probably for this as well. The teacher took this, so it's a little hard to see their writing, but you can get a little bit over their shoulder to see. I went. Tell me where you're going shopping. See how easily distracted she was? She went from ing, ang, ong to like, oh, lint on my hand. And then they took a nap because writing is really hard in kindergarten. But none of those, well, I'm not going to say it. What did you not hear? Can you say out loud what you did not hear? Just say it out loud. How do you spell? How do I spell? I don't know what this letter is. It didn't occur to them to ask because it's as if they all had blocks at their seat and the teacher said, build me a house. And they went, okay. And they all look a little different depending on how many blocks they have. Like some people have enough blocks to make a garage and a 2-story house. One little guy's just got a little teepee. He's got 2 on the bottom and 1 on the top, but he made a house. Okay, knock your house over, make me a castle, make me an airport. Why would I have to ask you for something that I've already got? Like I've got what I need to do it. Now, maybe if you said, make me a castle and I'm the kid with 3 blocks, I might be like, I don't know how, because I've only got this. But it wasn't, they weren't being asked to do something that they didn't feel they had power to do. They actually felt like they had some stuff to work with and they didn't know what right was. So they weren't worried like, upper grade, 4th grade might be like, well, I can try to spell it, but I don't know that I'm spelling it right. They don't know anything other than I've got some sounds. I've got these blocks that I can use to build those with, and I'm gonna put it together and take what I've got to make that. And that is such a powerful thing. And this is only, what was it, November? So all they had was the individual letter sounds. Better Alphabet Song would have already put into them those individual letters and sounds. Plus they've got however many secrets that teacher tossed out to that point. I don't know, 12, 14, 16, 20. I have no idea. There's not that many. There's really not that many. Our code is not that broad when things are collapsed and defaulted. And I will hear that sometimes. I actually saw that in a group yesterday, a question about, well, I don't think all 44 phonemes are represented with the secret stories. They are, but from a brain's perspective, like they're not separated out. The goal isn't to say how many phonics rules can we make. The goal is to say, how can we consolidate and streamline every possible thing letters do when they get together, but in a way that follows a logical progression. So why do we have to have the O sound on a different rule or secret than the ow sound? The bottom line is OUOW is going to say ow, and when it doesn't, the next most likely thing to try is the O. So what you want is a course of action. Like if you're a soldier, you want to know, okay, I'm going to go in this house first. If nobody's there, then we're supposed to go next door. If I don't see anybody there, there's a church at the end of the street, and that's most likely where everybody's going to be. Like you don't want just random kind of even Steven options. You want to know most likely, next most likely, if all else fails. And ideally, if the objective is the same, you want all those options on the same card. Like if the objective is I need the ow sound or I need the O sound, or I see an OU or an OW, let's bundle all that together so you know everything there is to know about that. Like it doesn't need to be divided into multiple phonics rules. Same thing with T and H. I'll hear sometimes, well, why isn't there a voiced and an unvoiced TH secret? Because we don't need it. You don't have to have it. There's no kid that can go the. It doesn't matter that you're saying or they can still figure out the word. The goal of the game is get the word, get them reading, get the word. The goal of the game is not, you know the difference between a voiced and an unvoiced sound, don't you? One is chordal involvement and one is non-chordal involvement. And certain words have chordal involvement, others don't. For instance, this, you can hear my vocal cords engaged, but when I say with versus with, you can hear the non-engagement. It's not that that's not interesting. It is interesting and it is totally true. And if you're a speech pathologist, you may have to dig into that with certain kids who do struggle. And by the way, every kid, by the way, is going to want to go for sometimes, because that's a speech. I mean, articulation's tricky. Earlier developing learners especially are underdeveloped in that area, but that's why it's so important to show them what they know, which is when you're being bratty, you don't accidentally do this to your brother. You do this. So the good part about that is it takes care of itself. In order to be bratty, I got to get my tongue out of my mouth. So I may not auditorily process that. If you just say, I'd like you to say the word this, and they go, this, like auditorily, they may not have the ability to hear the difference. But if they're trying to stick their tongue out at their brother, you're going to get that tongue out, not because you gave them specific speech articulation directions, but because that's how you stick your tongue out at someone. That part they know. So you just kind of take a faster route instead of the longer way around. And you can do that if the goal of the game is to read the word. You couldn't do that if the goal of the game is to train a speech pathologist. If you're training a speech pathologist, you do need to absolutely make sure that they are aware of what constitutes the difference between a voiced or an unvoiced sound, because they're going to have to talk about that with certain kids. But if you're trying to get Johnny to read, give him what he needs to be able to get the word. And if he can get the word, you're good. Move, like get it going. Because the goal has to be speed. You have to get more pieces to power up the time that we're already spending reading and writing. Otherwise, we've got teachers reading and writing for countless hours during the day, because you may not even know you're doing it. But every time kids are looking at a word, they're engaging in reading and writing, or looking at your morning message, or trying to read the lunch menu, or figuring out which name tags go with which papers. That's all reading and writing. And we want the bang for the buck out of that. But we only get it if they actually have enough of the code to make sense of that. Otherwise, you're just kind of checking the box and saying you're reading and writing all day, but you're actually not, any more than this morning we were, when you're staring at your pig and you have no P, I, or G. Like, that's not really reading and writing. That's just what it would feel like if we could. And it's not, it's too much time spent without the gain from that time. And it's literally all based on how much they have to work with. These are kindergarten writing samples, and you're going to see tons. And if you go online, you can see the whole class, all 26 laid out as they progress from the very beginning of kinder, where they literally did not even know all their letter sounds. And then you'll see 2 weeks in, like you'll see the first day where it's just random scratches with a green crayon. 1 month in, which is when the Better Alphabet song should have been at least knocking out all of the sounds for at least half or more. And then you'll see other progressive times like holidays into the spring. And then you'll see that same few different classes, but all consistently moving upward to the end of first, just so you can gauge it. But here's the reason I put this. This is not going to be on your word wall, just like Vacation House or Before School Program. What you saw those other kids building in their writing is not going to be on your word wall. Something else that won't be on your word wall is right here. They almost got eaten. They had a wedding. The ghost almost kissed her, but the dad said, "Get your hands off my wife." The ghost flew away and they lived happily ever after. You're probably not going to have words to create a story like that on your word wall. And yet that's what that kid wanted to build. Isn't that amazing? Like, the things they come up with when their imagination can actually be put into paper form is incredible. And the best part is it keeps a writer writing and it keeps a reader reading. Writing begets reading, reading begets writing. The more time you do one, it empowers the other. Kids aren't going to want to do much with just the 5 sight words on the wall, but they'll do all kinds of things when they're building with the blocks that they actually own. And he made lots of mistakes. I mean, look, he spelled they. I love that he didn't know whether it was EY or way. So he thought, I'm just going to put both. That way I know I'm right. And he did that. And that was so funny that he did. Wedding, he has the WH. He doesn't have perfect spelling, which I would never expect him to. And yet he can get that into what he wants to actually say. And everything he writes helps him as a reader. And then we fine tune that spelling by actually doing the reading, which if he can put it together, he can take it apart. And then this just shows you some other, these are dolphin ones. And see, look how he spells hate. He picked the wrong way to get the AI sound, but it shows you ownership of a particular skill that if he now read the word bait in a book, you know he owns that piece of the code. Now he probably also owns, well, he does also own the mommy E way to get the A to belong, but he just picked the wrong one. Or I don't know, kids are weird. Maybe he just thought he liked that one better, or he likes to make an I. I don't know, but I could pick my poisons when he brings that up to me. I could pick one thing, maybe the most frequently used or the most needed kind of most constant sound that he seems to be putting incorrectly into words. And I could maybe just pick that as my battle for that day and just focus on that one. And then little by little by little, do that part on my own manually, but also feel very comfortable that he's so far ahead of where he needs to be with his access that he's going to be reading so much. That's going to do the bulk of my spelling fine tuning. Really, the best fine tuner of spelling is reading. It's just that the kids who can't spell often are the ones who aren't reading. So you get stuck doing everything manually, and that is torturous. That's a lot to do manually because none of it's got emotional connections or interest for kids. But anyway, I pointed out that mistake because there's tons of mistakes on both of these because they're literally building from whole cloth. They're not copying any words. This is first grade. And you know, this one is amazing. This story is about an alien bug this little guy was from, he was a Cockney Brit. So he could talk like, I couldn't even understand him. I can't even imitate the accent. It was kind of like, I don't know, it had like weird upticks and it was almost not like English. I just cannot even replicate it. But anyway, he was writing this and I walked by because I happened to see this and I saw the word Nookus, Nookus. And I'll tell you what his story was first. His story was about an alien bug who lived on a planet. And this was coming from a science the study of planets and gravity and, all of these little content pieces that you're hoping might come out, because the writing request was just make it set in outer space. Any characters you want, like the fairy tale character with the get your hands off my wife, that writing came from a fairy tale study unit, and they weren't confined in any way other than they had to have set characters and there had to be like magic. There was like an ingredients list. I don't know if you saw it. And this, you can get these free writing packs, by the way, in the download. This is one of the clickable links. It takes you to a pack you can download free, and you'll have these frames. It's just different ways to write for different purposes. But this one for the planet, all they had to do is set it in outer space. So I didn't see a lot of good content coming back to me, because he mentioned something about that they all would sit on the planet and hang their feet off the edge. So clearly that wasn't helpful, that he thought there was a flat planet out there. But he said they love to play a game where they would breathe fire at astronauts to scare them away from their planet. And he also said that the way they would stick to their planet is with their nucus. Now, that was when I saw this word nucus, and I saw it a few times. And so I asked him, what is nucus? And he said in his accent, he goes, that's the stuff that makes you sick of stuff. I can't even imitate it. You'll have to like Google Cockney Brit and listen to that sound. But basically the stuff that makes you stick to stuff. What he meant was his mucus. He just spelled it nucus. And so the mucus, because apparently gravity didn't make sense to him either. So mucus is how we stay grounded to the planet, or at least in this alien bug planet. And so the bugs have this mucus which attaches them to the planet. The problem is the mucus is also slightly attached to the fire they breathe. And he accidentally one day blew the fire so hard, he spit out some of his mucus by accident, which meant he didn't have enough to stick to the planet. And so he started kind of bouncing, like he could stick just a bit, but then he'd come unstuck, and then he'd have to get a little bit more of his mucus hold, and then he'd get unstuck. And the more he was doing this, he couldn't play with his alien bug friends, and he was getting angry, and he was turning into a mean alien bug. Because on the fairy tale unit, there was power, and then there were characters, and some characters would shift from good to bad or vice versa. So he carried that idea over and turned this alien bug from a free-loving Martian alien bug to this mean, I'm going to take revenge on all of Earth's astronauts bug, which he did, by the way, because he had just enough mucus to attach himself to a helium balloon that was flying by, which he knew would sink eventually, and he could return or take that to get to Earth to seek revenge on the astronauts that caused him to spit out his mucus. And he ends with ... saga, what continues, alien bug revenge on Earth astronauts. Now, I mean, that whole idea of all of that was so mind-boggling, but to see the ability to put that together and to know that he was just glued to wanting to tell that story, and all of that time spent is just reinforcing those sound symbol relationships for reading too. Like, that's the magic of doing the reading and writing you're already doing, but when they actually have something to read and write with, it just changes everything. It literally powers up so much that in early grades, we don't realize we're doing for no purpose. Now, day one, if you teach anything under third grade, it is going to be August. Well, I shouldn't say that. I don't know when you start school. Do you start school in August? Okay. So if you start school in August, you may have sung whatever alphabet song you sing, which presents you with a big problem when you walk 3 feet to the right and you look at the calendar, because you probably sang either A or A for the A sound. And now you're going to have to look up here and say, okay, guys, let's read this word. Ready? August. Now you've just done the opposite of what you told them to do when you were singing the song, which is basically, when you see this letter, make this sound. Like, that's why we're singing the alphabet song, is to demonstrate, like, when you see these letters, these are the sounds that you make. So when you come over here and don't do that, and not only didn't you do it, you didn't not just not make the A sound, you also didn't make the U sound, but you did make a sound for a letter that's not even in that word, which is the A sound. Now, normally we don't call ourselves out on this. We just say, okay, so the word's August. Now, tomorrow we'll do it again, and we'll do this 30 days. We'll do this every single day. And hopefully by the end of August, you'll know this word's August before we switch to September. But what if a kid did say why? If they don't say why, which they wouldn't, unfortunately, but you say why, you can do it. You can call yourself out. Think like a kid and say, okay, let's read this word. Ready? August. August. Now that's actually more helpful, because you actually showed them the power of what it was over here that you were doing when you were singing the letter sounds. And you showed them, okay, I'm going to follow my line of logic, and I'm going to attack it just like I told you to attack it. And that didn't work. That can't be August. Who's got a birthday in August? Does anybody have an August birthday? Oh, you know what? Yeah, okay. That word has a secret in it. I almost didn't even notice that word has a secret. You know how I knew? Because it didn't sound like any word I'd actually ever heard. There's a secret. There's a grown-up reading secret in this word. But I have to be really careful because these are big secrets and you guys are little. And if I tell you a secret that your brain's not ready, it could explode. And I don't want that to happen. If you do, by the way, teach kinder, be careful, you'll set your criers off on the first day if you tell them that. But it's a significant motivational factor because what you're doing is turning this table to, I've got it, you want it, I'll decide if you can have it, but this is big. Like I've never told a kindergarten class. I've never told a first grade class. I've never told a second grade class because this is a second grade phonics skill. So you won't have taught this by the first day. Like this is coming up at some point, but not yet. So whatever grade is, their brains aren't big enough. But then you can tell them how you've actually never had a class quite as smart as they are. And they all did such a great job coming in. And wow, they all found their seat so well in there. Nobody's crying. Everybody's looking at you actually like they can't wait to hear what you might tell them. So maybe you guys are ready. Now, by the way, why are they looking at me like they can't wait to hear what I'm about to say when they don't even, especially in kinder, they don't know a letter from a number from a monkey. So why do they care? Why are they all like staring at me now like they actually are invested? What was the magic word? Secret. It's just so important to trigger a need to know first. If I just go off about letters and sounds and they don't even know what a letter, they're playing with their shoe, they're looking at the cart. I mean, they're doing everything other than looking up here if you're talking about something they don't care about. But secrets make things important to kids. I know there's concern about secrets and kids and all that, but these aren't just any secrets. These are grown-up reading secrets, which means all grown-ups know them and you can tell any grown-up. You should tell grown-ups because they're going to be so impressed that you know one of their secrets. You just can't tell kids. Can't tell any other kids. Like if you have a little brother at home, I don't know, you may not be big enough to hear it, you know, but you definitely can tell the grownups because they know these secrets. I'm just letting you in on it because you are just so smart and so grown up. And the secret, oh, I guess I can't tell you yet. First, I have to just tell you a secret is when letters get together and don't do what they should. There's something you don't know about what they're doing. And if you know, you can figure out their sound. So these secrets are the reasons why letters make the sounds that they do. Now, it's neurobiologically impossible for kids to think deeply about things they don't care about. They have to think deeply about something in order to have easy access and use. So we have to make them care. And the scope of this, I mentioned her earlier, but the scope of her work is taking abstract skill content, like, and she's more middle school, so like, and high school, algebra, chemistry, things that just have no feeling or emotional tie whatsoever, and finding a way to tie it into an emotional connection. It's hard. Because the more abstract it is, the less, almost the more impossible it is. How do you connect a feeling to a letter or a number or a chemistry symbol? But if you can do it, that's where the power lies. So, oh, I have to tell you this too, sorry. Secret, need to know. The reason this is so important to trigger a need to know first is it marks the information for memory and prioritize learning in the brain. So in other words, it goes down a different chute in the brain. You listen differently when you actually have the need to know. When I start telling you something and you don't even know if you want it yet, if you toss out information nobody asked for, nobody wants, and nobody cares, it's like throwing a ball to an empty field. Like you might get lucky and hit someone while they walk by, but the odds that they're going to actually catch it, put it in their pocket, have it ready, and be able to retrieve it are 1,000,000 to 1. And that's why you end up saying things 35,000 times when you're trying to teach something hard and kids aren't getting it. If you can spark the need to know on their end, now you've got a catcher's mitt in place, ready to take it. The problem is the need to know is based on what they already know, and kids don't know all the same things. So whereas somebody might be like, yes, I've always wondered why the AU sound was different. Most of your kids are like, I don't even know what a letter is, or I don't care, or I'm not even interested. So how do you get a need to know when everybody has different things they know and therefore different things they need to know? Go with your common denominators. What's something that's kind of consistent to everybody? Everybody wants what they're not supposed to have. Secrets by default are something you're not supposed to know. So for a kid, it's one way. There's some other ways, but it's one way to powerfully trigger the need to know. And when you have a need to know, you have an adrenaline rise. You actually have a different chemistry, a biology shift. And that increase in adrenaline acts as a memory fixant. It's a heightened state of alert. It really is like a catch a ball face. If I had a ball right now and said, okay, I'm going to throw this to somebody, get ready, everybody would tense up a little bit. I mean, not in a nervous way, but just kind of like you'd be ready. You'd be kind of on guard and you would have a little bit of a rise in your adrenaline. That adrenaline acts as a memory fixant. So it changes the whole way kids receive the information. And this teacher demonstrates very well how to make this happen. So if we can turn the volume way up on this, because it's pretty quiet.
Oh my
graders don't know the secret. Don't know secrets. Don't know the secrets. The first graders don't know the secrets. You're the first kindergartners that ever told the secrets to.
Now, you'd never guess she's about to tell them a phonics skill. Isn't that crazy? Like, it's so interesting to see the back and front door difference. Same content. She's going to tell them about the AUAW, except she's not going to talk about it as a vowel combination, and they're only in kinder, and they wouldn't know an A if it hit them on the head yet. But yet she's about to do that, and they look like she's going to give them like a Twinkie with icing on top. And you got second grade trying to teach the AUAW, and they actually might need it and know they need it because they can't spell the word on the spelling test, and who cares? How do you make something totally shift like that that's so not exciting into something that they're actually begging to hear? And that's where it's so much fun to play with the brain, because you can literally do the exact same thing but in a different way, and it ends up in a whole different place than it should end up, which is just, to me, the most amazing thing. So these letters are in love, and I don't mean a little in love. I mean, they have a huge crush on each other. And it's not just AW too. Now I'm going to scoop out the whole secret, because why would I want to divide this up and make it two things to learn? It's one concept and there are two of them. It's like having kids in your room. I know you two have a crush on each other, and I know you two do also. So I'd really like you not to sit together at nap time or whatever it is. Like I want you guys to split up and blah, blah, blah. Kids categorize like that. Like they know the kids who get in trouble, or they know the kids who always cry, or they know the kids who can't have a peanut, or they know the kids that have to go to the nurse, or the kids whose parents, whose mom or dad works at the school. Like we chunk information. So this is one concept, letters that are in love. It's one sound. Ah, because that's what they say, because they get so embarrassed anytime they have to stand like right together in a word that they always put their heads down and they go, ah, and that's the sound they make. Now, here's the thing. If you don't know that, then you would think his name is Aston instead of Austin. Or you'd think this word was S-awa instead of S-ah. Or the book we read today about Alexander and the terrible, awful, horrible, no good day, you'd think that word was awful. So see how important these grown-up secrets are? Now, it's that fast. It's that easy. And there's no harm. No harm can come from telling a story. You don't read Cinderella and then go home at night and agonize that your kids probably weren't ready for Cinderella. You should have done Snow White first. You knew it, but you got excited and you did Snow White, and you know that Snow White's much simpler than Cinderella, and you really should have always, stories are just stories. Kids take what connects with what they understand and they let go of everything else. Some kids take a story to heart and it's meaningful and they get the hidden message in there, and other kids are just like, pretty dress. I like her dress. And the whole story went right over their head. So stories do no harm, but it's powerful information if it's a door that you have to unlock every day. There's no thing about this that makes this super important to do on day one. The only reason that I'm using it is it's a door that's going to be locked otherwise every morning when I do calendar. Like every morning I'm setting myself up for failure, because I'm going to make the A harder to teach in my alphabet if I thwart myself every single morning 5 minutes later. As a matter of fact, the brain's going to keep score. So it's going to go, okay, one for A, one for ah. Still don't have a clue what that letter says. Like it's literally a pattern making machine. So unless I can weight it more in one direction or the other, it's just going to delay this from ever taking hold. And I want both. I want them to know A says A and A, but I also want them to be able to make use of the time I'm going to spend every morning talking about August. Because otherwise you have to say, why am I doing it at all? Like, why am I even up here? Why would I even pretend to read the word August if I know and they know that it actually is totally not readable? And if anything, it's just actually harming what I'm trying to teach with A. See, this is where you like have to rethink everything almost, because we do talk about August and we want them to know what month it is, but we don't want to thwart what we're trying to teach them about what A says. But yet we're not just here to look at words all the time. Like we're looking at them for a reason. We want kids to try to figure them out. We want kids to try to make the connection. We want kids to understand what reading is, that letters come together and the sounds they make are in the words. And if you know the sounds, you can figure out the words. But if the sounds they make are not the sounds they think are in the words, then it actually just makes it harder, not easier. So in a perfect world, they would get lateral access to the code instead of bits and pieces over 3 years. But we can make that perfect world if we just use that neuroscience to find a way to give them that access. And that's where this is so powerful. You could never get away with doing this if these were phonics skills. As a matter of fact, you'd be insane to teach this phonics skill on the first day of kindergarten. Like, you should be fired. Like, that shows you have no awareness. Your kid doesn't know like what his foot looks like, let alone what an A looks like. And you're talking about high level vowel combinations, but you're not teaching a phonics skill. You're just telling a story about a couple letters that happen to be in this word that we're going to look at every single day. And that's the reason why this letter A isn't doing what it should. Because what's A supposed to say? That's right, or A, but it's not. But you know why? It's because it's got that huge crush on you. So you're just making sense. That's really all you're doing. You're just making sense for kids who are ready to need it to make sense. And some kids aren't ready to. Some kids are just going to go, like they're just going to act it out and make the sound. Other kids are going to go to lunch and they're going to say, look, teacher, look, I see the letters that are in love in our menu. See, for sauce, see spaghetti, sauce. Can I get Miss Martha to let me have a pink marker and I'll put a heart on them on the menu? Like they're noticing it everywhere. So that's the neat part, is you can toss something out like on a buffet and let the kids eat what they will. You're not forcing it on them. You're not a waitress going, you need to eat that now, or I'm not bringing you the next. Come on, you're behind. I need you to eat this because they're already on their appetizer. It's just like coleslaw on a buffet. Some kids are going to turn their nose up on it, not want it. They know where it is. They know what it looks like. They just don't need it yet. And other kids are going to just devour it, but it's there for the taking whenever they're ready to take it. And in the meantime, they're going to be needing it because you're going to look at the word August every day. Now, if it weren't August when school started, if school started in September, can you guess what secret I might need to share? That's right, because every other letter will do what it should. September. That's a problem, but not if they know ER-IRUR, terrible, awful, horrible, no good drivers. And every time they slam on their brakes, they go, and that's the sound they make. Every kid's been in a car. Every kid's been in a car when it stopped fast. Everybody can relate to the feeling that you get when you go, and every kid will love to slide across your floor and kick 3 other people as they go while they act this out and go, So wherever they are on that with itness level, it doesn't matter. It's the sound symbol connection that we're going for. If all they like to do is just, slide across the floor, that's fine. If it prompts them to do that, that's what we want. What we also want, though, is to transfer it up so they can use it to read the word or to earn or bird, because we're going to be reading those words as we are looking at whatever it is we're looking at, or writing or reading or doing whatever we're doing. So our sight words alone are going to give us opportunities to use these keys to unlock those doors. And I do want to say one more thing about this. Upper grades. I was watching in the group, there was a 4th grade teacher, and they were talking about the word hydraulic. And he said, in science, we needed the same sneaky Y, which I haven't told you guys yet, but we need the same sneaky Y and the same 2 letters that were in love to crack the word hydraulic in 4th grade. And we needed the mommy and babysitters for hyperventilate and sneaky Y. So the code doesn't change, just the text level. The building blocks stay the same. They're just building castles in 4th grade, whereas we're building dog houses in kindergarten. It's just the text level, but the code has to be owned by everybody. Like those upper grade kids, the TH is in the word the, but it's also in a medical textbook under thrombosis. So the code is everywhere. It's just kids have to own it to plow through text at their level, and text is everywhere. So that means you can use this everywhere. What I wanted to mention was a little girl who was 4. She was in a workshop like this. It was over the summer and her mom didn't have a babysitter. She brought her to the workshop. And the reason I want to share this example is just to show what non-conscious learning actually looks like. I was doing this, and the only time she looked up, she was on her mom's phone, very well behaved, only looked up one time when she had a need to know. And her need to know was, and I'll just do what I did, and then I'll tell you what her need to know was. I was saying that these letters are in love, and I said, and she went like this. She went, and then she was seated kind of in the back, so she half stood, and she was looking at me like this, and she only looked at me for about 6.5 seconds. Then she got bored and she went back to her mom's phone. Now, the only reason she looked at me is she had a need to know. And her need to know was, is she having a stroke? Is the ambulance going to come? Is she okay? I don't know what she said to her mom, but in her head, she looked at me out of alarm because I looked crazy when all of a sudden the normal speech shifted to, and I'm wiggling like this. I leaned to the left with an extreme body gesture. My voice changed. Now, she had a need to know, and that's this survival mechanism of something's out of the norm. It was something novel, something unexpected, that instantly triggers our need to know because we're trying to account for what that could be. So that's what happened to her. It only took her about 5.5, 6 seconds of this heightened state of alert, heightened kind of focus, to realize everything's boring again. She's talking like a person again. Okay, she's not going to pass out. So I'm bored now. I'll go back to my mom's phone. So an hour went by. We took a break. We came back from the break and I went up to her and I said, could you tell me what these letters say? And her mom said, she just turned 4. She's not going to start kindergarten yet for another year and a half. She doesn't know her letters. She knows her name, but I don't think there's letters in her name. Like, that's okay. This is just an experiment. I said, could you tell me what these letters say? And the little girl went exactly like this. She went, ah. She turned her body the way I did. She wiggled on her feet the way I did, and her voice changed. Now, she's not ready to read. She's not going to use that to decode, but how interesting it is that she could see a symbol and have a sound pop right out. And I wasn't trying to teach it, and she wasn't trying to learn it. She just looked up at the wrong time or right and got stuck with it, whether she wanted it or not, because it connected with what she already understood, which means it was already there. It just got kind of glued together by accident. Now, we took another break, or it was actually toward the end of the workshop, and I did the opposite. I put 10 of these on a wall, like on a chalk tray, and I went to the little girl and said, could you go point to the letters that say, ah? And she could reverse the process and identify the culprit that made the sound by pointing to it. That's what a writer would have to do. So a reader has to see this and have a sound pop out. A writer has to hear the sound and identify an option he could use to put it down. She could do both of those things, but not for those purposes yet, because she doesn't know what any of it's about. It's just being kind of, I'm going to call it backloaded, but it's really like front loaded. It's just being moved in as information, but it's not transferred yet for a purpose. But it's so interesting because 4th and 5th grade teachers could teach a vowel combination every single day for a week, and still the kids can't just instantly say the sound. And she instantly could make the sound when she sees the symbol, or instantly find the symbol when she hears the sound. And the only reason is because it's got these connector pieces that are emotional ties. So it's living in a different part of her brain. And I'll show you what part of her brain it's actually living in. But novelty, by the way, is another way to trigger need to know. So vocal inflection or an extreme body gesture, that triggers need to know like secrets do, because it forces attention that becomes that heightened state of alert as they're trying to figure out what in the world you're doing. And all you need is that few seconds to make the connection, as long as it connects back to what they understand. The brain develops back to front. The earlier developing area of the brain that we're targeting are these social, emotional, feeling-based networks, and they're in the mid-rear part of the brain. The higher level executive processing centers are in the front, and that area is not even fully developed until your mid-20s. We keep teaching phonics and targeting the higher level executive processing centers by telling them, B says ball or W says walrus, and they have to hear, they have to identify the picture, then they have to remember the word, then they have to segment the sounds, then they have to isolate which sound of the segmented sounds is the one that actually matches the letter. And then they have to go through that whole cognitive process each time as they try to remember the letters, and that's just if it makes one sound. If it makes 2, it becomes really tricky. That's a very high level task that many kids are not ready for, which is why so many kindergartners come out of kinder and don't know all their letters. And you know what else is the reason? Because they can't reinforce them naturally, because they can't read with them. If you could read real words easily that are around everywhere with your individual letters, they'd be much easier to teach. But letters almost never make the sounds they make individually in real words, because when they come together, they become phonics patterns and make different sounds. So that means the only real reinforcement with individual letters is working on individual letters. You can't really reinforce the individual letter sounds with text that's everywhere, because that text is going to thwart those individual sounds, which is again why you work so hard for so little for just those skills. But anyway, if the brain develops back to front and we want to target the back, these feeling-based networks, we have to trick the brain, because we don't get to choose where skills are stored or retrieved. So if we want the feeling connections or that social emotional center, the affective domain to engage, we have to cheat. We have to wrap it up in a social or an emotional disguise, and we have to turn these letters into something kids could relate to. When we can connect some sort of an emotional response to the behavior that they have, the sound behavior, that triggers activation in the area of the brain that we actually want, that we know is reliable and that's already there. It's highly developed. So that area is capable of holding the information, of retrieving and giving back the information. It's not capable of applying it to read a word. This part is. It has to transfer. So what they have instant access to is going to have to transfer to the higher level processing center for them to say, oh, I get why the words, I get it's August because the ones that are in love are the ones that are in that word August. Because like same thing with Austin, I get it. Like in the meantime, when they're just like going that hasn't transferred. It's the transfer that's going to create the use. But the good part again is the transfer is not the hard part because we're already giving them constant opportunities to see these letters making these sounds as we read our morning message or look at our classmates' name tags or read the lunch menu or do our sight words or read through our morning story or do our math problem. Text is literally everywhere. And everywhere it is, there'll be secrets that they're recognizing and that you're talking about because you're also going to leave a breadcrumb trail. So when you write your morning message and it starts with the word this or the, you can even walk through it out loud and say, I don't see a letter on the alphabet that says, and let the kids say, that's because it's a secret. It's not on the alphabet. Huh? It's not an alphabet sound. It's over there. It's a secret. Remember, they stick their tongue. Oh, well, what is it? Can you tell me again? They stick their tongues out at each other and they go, who sticks their tongues out at each other? They do. Who are they? What are their names? Those T&H. What do they do again? They stick their tongues out. They go, okay, so what do I need to write then for the word the? TH, like until they're annoyed with you because you're like, but that's how helpful it is to leave a tight breadcrumb trail because that's the process. Some kids just instantly make these connections. Like you give a mouse a cookie, he eats it, they got it. Other kids, like they really can lose sight of the breadcrumb trail quickly if you're not connecting the dots for them. But the good part is there is no time you're going to do this during the day. I should say that up front too. Remember I said it's not a program? You're not going to have secret story time from 9 to 9:22 ever. There's no time you will be doing secret stories because it will happen all the time. It will never not be happening. It's how they make sense of text all around them. It's just a constant. It's the way they literally make sense of text, whether it's to read or to write or to figure out anything within it. And the goal is they don't need you. You're modeling all of this so that they have access on their own. You're just modeling how to use it. Like they don't need you to model what says or what says th. They can do that. That's what the wall is for. That's easy. The hard part is, what do I do with that? What's it for? I don't even know what writing is. What's reading? What do letters have to do with anything? Like that's all foreign to them. If you're 3rd, 4th, or 5th grade, the neat part is you don't have almost any work whatsoever because your kids already know what they don't know and they know what they can't read. So as soon as you give them what they already know they don't have, they already know where to plug it in and use it. So it's so much faster, so much easier in 3rd, 4th, or 5th grade to plug those holes quickly. But in K1, 2, your kids literally don't even know what reading is. They don't even know what a letter does. So the hard part is the easy part, and the easy part becomes the hard part. Normally, the hard part in primary is you got to teach them all these skills. You don't have to do that. That's the easy part because the sound wall, once you've told the story, this wall will hold it together and they don't need you to access the sound. The hard part is showing them how to use it, like how this actually helps you read the word huh. See those letters that are in that car and they stop fast? Who are they? That's right, ER. That's right. And that's why this word's not era, it's ha. So just running them through kind of that back and forth. What you can do as you're accessing this different area of the brain to hold these skills is you're bypassing these landmines that are usually associated with struggling readers, especially what we would say present as dyslexia, although there's a lot of conversation about dysteachia. Because dyslexia can kind of end up being the end result of not having been taken through the proper motions of what that learner needs. Some kids can work around a path, even if it's not the smoothest. Others can't. They get stuck and they can't move on. And then being stuck means they start compensating in some weird ways that can then present itself as dyslexia. Another thing, if kids have poor working memory, a poor auditory discrimination, a lot of those things can again lead to what then presents as what would become dyslexia as kids are moving through without these kind of pathways open and able to be used. You don't want to have to walk through the landmines that you already know are there. Underdeveloped learners are a given in KM1. 4th and 5th grade struggling readers are very similar to K1 learners in that the working memory is often an issue. The auditory deficits are typically a problem. Those are norms for K1. K1 has auditory deficits, mainly because they don't want to listen, and sometimes because they can't, and other times because they can't discern. Articulation, they automatically sound like they have 40 marbles in their mouth at any given time. That's normal until they start to articulate more clearly. Working memory, when you're younger, it's much more difficult to manipulate various thoughts at the same time, but a lot of the same issues are presented with struggling upper grade learners. So at the end of the day, those are just the front door paths that present these blocks. If you go through the back door, you don't have to use your working memory to tell me or to think of what this sound is. You don't have to struggle or tax your working memory to remember what happens when a car stops. You already know what happens when a car stops. So it's ready now to use it to read the word her. But imagine if you didn't know the sound of a car when it stops. Like imagine if this were just taught to you as the R-controlled vowels. Now you've got two things to juggle. I have to remember the phonics rule for R-controlled vowels. And then once I remember that, then I have to use it to figure out how to read the word her. And that's where a lot of kids can start to get lost, especially when there's multiple phonics patterns in a longer word and they're in 3rd or 4th grade. So if you can tap into what they already own, there is no tax on working memory. There's also not a task on auditory problems, because when that little girl went, ah, she wasn't thinking lip position, tongue position, mouth shape. It was a feeling that generated a sound, and the sound popped out, which is totally different than if she said, okay, I do remember you covered that in the workshop. I believe the sound was ah, and I think the examples you gave were August, awesome, awful. So yeah, the it would be the ah sound. Is that correct? Is that the phonic sound? Like she wasn't using these higher level processing auditory skills to retrieve it. It was a feeling that was going to land her in that same sound either way. So if her auditory powers were a little off, if her ability to hear the ah versus the versus the ooh weren't quite strong enough, it doesn't matter, because she's not going to go ooh. She's going to go ah, and there's our sound. Does that make sense? So it just bypasses what otherwise are real blocks for kids. Imagine instead of doing page 27 in your workbook on R-controlled vowels, you showed your kids this. And we're going to turn the volume up for this one as well to make sure it can be heard.
ER, IR, and UR love to go riding in cars, but they are terrible, awful, horrible, no good drivers. They don't even have driver's licenses, and they always have to slam on the brakes and say,
Now, I love that you laughed at that teacher's face, because that shows me that this is deeply entrenched, and it means that I got a much more a much greater neural impact, because laughter it does not occur in one area of the brain. Laughter occurs as the response from multiple areas of engagement simultaneously. And one thing that we do know, if we have kids hooked up to a brain imaging scan and we deliver instruction, we know that the more areas that we can trigger engagement and the more widespread those areas are, the deeper the learning. So you don't want just one blip on the radar because they recognize something familiar, like on workbook page 36, and they know the word her, and I think that is in that. You want blips all over the radar. You want things popping off in lots of different places, because all those connections will help hold that skill down. They'll be able to retrieve it using all of the things that they engaged with it. You know, what's used together is fused together. What's wired together is what's fired together is wired together. So we want the most fires happening with each delivery of a skill, because each of those connections become another anchor to hold it in place. So the fact that you laughed means I don't even need a brain scan to know that we engage multiple areas simultaneously, because humor is an intelligent skill. So this is really kind of a key piece there. But what's really interesting is this little girl could take those teachers' jobs, because she's even better at telling it than they are. And she only heard it once. Her mom was at a workshop. It was a state required DPI workshop for schools that needed to make improvement or they would be closed. And I got 1 day of the 3-day mandatory workshop that happened the weekend before school started. Her mom came and then went back home, and at dinner, so this is 3 days into the school week, she's a kindergartner. She has a pre-K sister. I know all this because I got tagged in a tweet, but her mom went home. At the dinner table, she was telling her husband what they did at the workshop. And when she got to my day, she was giving him an example of that secret to help kids read a certain word. Well, the kids listened and overheard it. She was doing dishes with her husband, and she heard all this noise in the other room. And when she went out, they were playing school. And this is what she saw. So this kindergartner was playing school with her pre-K sister, and mom caught this on video, and then she tweeted it, and then she tagged me in it so I could see it. She tells this a completely different way, because, you know, she only heard it once. So she gets the gist, but she doesn't like practice it. It's just her way of getting to that sound. And listen to what she says at the end, because it shows you where this actually lives in her brain, which is fascinating.
Hi kids, do you want to know about the secrets about these? So ER-IR, when they get together, they hop in their car, they drive crazy, and they say, yeah. So what they do, drive in their car, but when you grow up, you don't do that.
Did you hear that public service announcement that she made at the end? But when you grow up, you don't do that. Now that shows a whole nother anchor that she's got. She's had some lectures that she's overheard. I don't think to her, either an older brother, maybe mom to dad, dad to mom, somebody in the house has had that sound happening a few too many times in the car. And so she's overheard a lot about responsible driving. That is even going to help anchor the skill. All the connections she brings to the table, everything she knows about that. What did Forrest Gump say? Like, that's all that I know about that. Literally everything she knows about that is going to work on our behalf to hold that skill in place. So now she doesn't have to learn it. She already knows it. So now she just has to use it, figure out what it's for. What do we do with it? What can we do to play with it? How can it help me as a reader or as a writer? But what I loved is how she threw that out at the end, because you'd never say that at the end of your R-controlled vowel workbook page. But when you grow up, you don't do that. Like, this is living in a behavioral center. And that's where the stories are most powerful. Any stories for teaching. Go with what they know. Like, don't make random stories about kings and queens and sparkly things and, you know, Apple, the Annie alphabet, and Farmer Fred gets together with Penelope the pig, and together the P and H go for, or whatever. Go with what they know. Like, dig into these social emotional connections that drive their behavior every day, because they can navigate words they've never seen before and the sounds letters are making using the same thinking they use to drive their own behavior, which you'll see as we move into some higher level stuff. But I do love that this is such a way that it can be pulled so easily. The way that you want to trigger this social and emotional engagement, stories are just one way to do it quickly. There are a lot of ways, but stories are the fastest, easiest way to bring people on an emotional journey, or to connect them with something that's got this human kind of experience common denominator. So stories are the fastest, easiest way. They're also a way to trigger need to know, because everybody loves a story, even a bad story. Have you ever watched like the Hallmark Network and you get stuck on a Saturday doing laundry and you're pulled into the dumbest story you've ever watched, but now you have to see the end of the darn thing because you've watched it this long? Even though it's not a good story, you still have a need to know what happens at the end, the characters you don't even like. But it also provides an easy framework for memory reconstruction, because that little girl, when she told that story, she didn't tell it the way it was written in the little 2 sentences in the book. She made it her own, but she could reconstruct the framework of it because it led to something she understood completely, which is, so all she had to do was get there. That's another thing you'll see in the group a lot, is teachers fretting about, oh, but I don't know all the stories. I need to take my book apart with a hairdryer. Literally, they are taking it apart with a hairdryer. Now, you can put a fun cover on it, make it your book of secrets. I do love that. But I worry when new folks come in the group and think, oh my gosh, I have to disassemble my whole book and get a hairdryer and hang. I've seen the book pages hung on a laundry line in the sun because with the hairdryer, the glue got sticky and they're trying to, like, I don't even understand. But the reason is they're concerned that, like a manual, they have to reference these stories all the time. You do not. You do it the way the 5-year-old does it. Look at the picture, say what you see. Like, there's no right way to do it. As a matter of fact, the more you make it your own, the more fun it is for kids, because what it tells them is you make it your own. If you feel like I have to run back to the book and make sure I do it just right, then they're going to hesitate to tell you what they think they see, because it isn't just right. She did not do it just right, and it was 10 times better than what just right actually was, because it was more meaningful to her, which means it's deeper owned, more deeply owned. We want this to be what resonates with them, not what we say that they may or may not connect with. So you feel the same way. Like, what I had a teacher that had 3 sons and they all got their licenses around the same time. And she would tell the story and relate it back to her kids and say, every darn time I'm in my house and I hear, I know one of my kids has a car. Like, her kids loved to hear her talk about her personal life, and she would wrap that kind of into these stories. And she'd also wrap the kids into the story. So don't feel like you have to do something exactly a certain way, because the whole point is it's a framework for memory reconstruction in a way that makes sense to you. This is just something that I thought was helpful to notice, because it's not something we would see typically in a front door world with traditional phonics. This teacher wrote, my intention was to use these with students with significant phonetic weaknesses. My small group, she's 3rd. My small group got way bigger than I planned because the majority of my students wanted to join in. Some of my strongest readers were strategically placing themselves around us on the rug, pretending to read so they could listen. Now, could you imagine if you are doing page 36 on R-controlled vowels and having your higher kids come and say, oh, I love this phonics page. I could do this unit 100 times. I've just got to listen to this once more. Like, it would never happen. What's in it for them? There's nothing there, but it's a story. It's loud, it's messy, it's noisy, it's active. So it just pulls you in, if nothing else, to wonder, what are they doing over there? Like, what is going on over there? Like that little girl. So that need to know is just such a powerful thing. Now, in the context of a story or framework for memory reconstruction, Go with what they know because those are familiar buckets and they can navigate easily within them. Everybody knows the story of superheroes. Superheroes have core features. First of all, superheroes have power. That's why they're superheroes. They have a special power. Because they have a special power, they have to be in disguise, or everybody will know that they're the person with the special power. So almost all superheroes have a special power and a disguise. Now, there almost is always a villain, and the villain is somebody who maybe they're not terribly evil. Sometimes they just are mad that they don't have power, and they want power, and they want to steal something from the superheroes to take their power because they're mad that they don't have it. This is exactly the way you can teach the most important keys that are the core building blocks of the code, which are the vowels and sneaky Y. The vowels are superheroes. They have a power no other letter in the alphabet has. They can say their names, which I know is not impressive to us, and kids will not be impressed at all by that because they'd rather fly or breathe underwater. But they're not looking at this like the letter K would. Like a K would just be stuck every day of his life, just going k, 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 k. I mean, how boring that would be. He would love to have the superpower that a vowel has and be able to say his own name. And not just that, make a whole nother sound too. So they are the envy of every other letter. They all wish they could be like the superhero vowels, which is why they have a little disguise they wear to make sure nobody recognizes them. So they have these little short and lazy disguises where they'll duck out of sight. That way no one knows who they are. So for example, I'm going to tell this one instead of, okay, we'll keep the volume down because I'll go ahead and tell it. For example, and I think I skipped one. Okay, you. He likes to sit in the back of the class when he's in disguise and pretend he's not paying attention because no one suspects a superhero of not paying attention. So that way no one knows that he's actually superhero you. And what he does is every time the teacher calls on him, he will pretend he wasn't listening and he'll go, and that's the sound he makes. Now he's actually a superhero, but who would suspect when he never pays attention and he never listens? So, that's a schwa sound. There's no lip position, there's no tongue position. It just hangs in the air and air flows over the cords, over the vocal cords. So if you were in a vegetative state, you could make the sound if air were put over your cords. That makes it sound awful, first of all, but it also makes it sound easy. It's actually hard because the inclination is to want to make a sound. So kids want to move their tongue somewhere or move their mouth somewhere, which means they start to go into these other sounds, and it's actually hard because it's a shapeless sound. But everybody knows what you say when you don't know the answer. Poof, there's your short U. So there is no auditory discrimination needed. You don't have to go, look, honey, like hut or cut or butt. And they're going, and you're like, no, that's more like bot or hot or cot. I want like hut or cut. And they go, and you're like, okay, that sounds more like I mean, you could be there for hours, and I have been there for hours. Kids, just vowels are the hardest thing for early grade learners to teach, for ELL kids to learn, for upper grade struggling readers who typically have auditory deficits. They are a nightmare, and yet you can't read or write a single word without the vowels. They're the keys to the kingdom, and yet they are the hardest thing for kids to get, which renders them helpless, really, until they can get them. So we have to have a different workaround. So how easy is it to just go, and poof, there's your sound. Same thing with short E. She likes to pretend she's a little sweet old lady, and she's just as sweet as she could be. She's never a superhero because she could never be a little superhero. She puts a little bun on her head and some big glasses and walks around and goes, what'd you say, She'll even interrupt conversations on purpose just to make sure no one suspects that she's superhero E, because she knows they look very much alike. She knows, like, it's easy for her to be recognized. What'd you say, So that's her short and lazy sound. Short O goes to the doctor all the time, and he is worried about getting sick when he goes there. So he won't touch anything at all when he's in the office. He's especially worried about the stick that the doctor wants to check his throat with, because he's not sure the doctor remembers to throw it away in between patients. And so he will not let his lips, tongue, or teeth touch that stick, and he always goes, Now here's why that's really important. If kids relax their jaw at all, the turns into and they will relax their jaw because they don't have strong mouth muscles. On a good day, they don't have strong mouth muscles. They'll always head to the path of least resistance. It's much more tense to say than it is to go and of course that's a short U sound. If I relax my jaw, I'm not making a short O anymore. I'm doing an sound. Speech pathologists know this, so they'll say things going through the front door like this. make your mouth look like an O. You need to drop your bottom jaw down, put the tip of your tongue against the inside back part of your molars. They'll give multi-step directions. All you have to do is say that stick could have been in the mouth of the kid that just threw up all over the floor. You'll get the perfect short O sound every time, not because they're trying to follow the directions. They just don't want to touch the yucky stick. You can't make a short U sound without something touching the stick. So it's such a fun way to get exactly where you want them to go, but using what matters to them, which is yucky stick, not multi-step directions about lip position, tongue position, mouth shape. And you can't rely on the fact they can hear the difference, because a lot of them can't. They can't hear the difference between and ah. I mean, until they are able to, and this higher level processing center is developed, you're just stuck knocking on a door and no one's home. They may not have even pulled the permit to build the house yet. And you're just gonna keep knocking, trying to teach. But if the developmental readiness isn't there, there's nothing that can be done. So they're in the back. This part's ready to go. They're in a lawn chair in the backyard thinking about the house they're gonna build one day. Meet them back there, because then you can actually grab them and move. But you just can't expect to teach a skill as a skill when you're working with those earliest grade levels. And also upper grade struggling readers, there's a reason they're struggling. They also may not have the ability to discern I mean, think how little hint they're getting. And I'm making them clear. Depending on your dialect or your accent, it could be like, you know, in North Carolina, right? Or in Boston, or I guess that would be New York. Like, it can shift. So we have to move them far apart. So now they are getting far apart because we've got like they sound like they're worlds apart, and they all have a hook to hang their hat on that doesn't rely on their weakest points, their auditory or their working memory. Short I, he does a little exercise to make sure he can zip up his soup fast, because he knows that's what superheroes have to do. So what he does is he goes, and when he does it with proper form and gets a good hip bend, his mouth looks like a capital I. See? Now, if I only go this far, it doesn't. I have to go all the way. Now, kids, again, because they're going to go into what's comfortable, they're just going to go, and all you have to do is draw a lumpy circle on the board with a stick at the top and the bottom and say, this is not a capital I, but it's what your mouth looks like. Your mouth looks like some weird lumpy O with two sticks on either side. I need your lips to stay straight as a stick, because I want your mouth to look like a capital I. If they keep their lips straight as a stick, what's going to happen is they can't open to I's worst enemy, which is because that's what happens if they open an they get an which is why even in 4th grade, kids who can spell well will still spell multisyllabic words using an I where an E should be, or like they'll hear the and the as if they're one sound. So they'll just flip flop for no reason. But if their lips are straight as a stick, you can't get an to come out of a mouth shape that's And if they have the apples of their cheeks pulled back, which this is what their fingers do, they can't get a hold of any extra lip slack to go like, So they basically can't mess it up. They're trapped. Nothing else can come out of this shape other than the perfect short I sound. And that's really important because that's a hard sound to make. That's the hardest sound to make. That's one of the reasons, again, why E and I are so mixed up even into upper grades, because a lot of kids never really fully engaged into that sound. They were more into an and that's the short E. And that's such a slight difference. So it's why the fingers have to be in place, because developmentally, most kids are not strong enough to engage the way they'd have to give you a clear They're just not able to do it at the earliest grade level. But the fingers can take over for what the mouth muscles can't do. So you get what you want at the end, which is the actual sound that's in the word, because we need them to have these sounds down. The last one is an A, and if you bite an apple, it's the moment before the bite that you want to capture. So if you bite an apple, it's very different than when there's no apple in your hand, because you don't want to pretend to bite an apple or you'll go, you'll drop your jaw down, because when we open our mouth, we drop our jaw down. An apple bite's actually a lift from the top up. And we never lift our mouth from the top up unless we're either surprised, which is not on purpose, it's non-conscious, or if we're fake smiling. Oh, that meatloaf was so good. I loved that. And that's not on purpose either. So we never intentionally open our mouth from the top up, which is why when we say some kids who don't strongly connect with sounds might go because they see your mouth open and they try to replicate it. They have to lift from the top up. It's hard to direct that, especially with ELL kids where that sound isn't in their language. So just give them an apple and cut through the chase. Because when they have an apple, it takes care of itself. You know why? Because you can't bite it if you drop your jaw down. You have to eat it like a dinosaur. and we can't eat an apple by biting up. We have to bite up and over. So visually, they will have to adjust their mouth to go, ah, and that's the perfect sound. You just have to stop them the moment before they bite. Ah, because as soon as they're ready to bite, everything's in perfect shape. They've got the lift from the top up, the tongue is pulled back and spread wide on the inside. It's the perfect short A sound. Ah, but they might need a real apple to capture it, especially if they're ELL. American speakers don't tend to have trouble with this one, but this is the hardest one for ELL kids. And the reason he eats an apple every day is he doesn't want to end up like, oh, in the doctor's office all the time. So that's why he does that, especially now, because he's heard how bad those doctor's offices can be. This, oh, if we could turn this up. This is the pre-K sister of the kindergarten student.
When he eats his apple, he says, ah. And then he turns into a superhero and he says, hey. He says his name. Hi, kids. My name's Dempsey. And want to know about A and R? When they stand stand by each other, they say ah. Bye-bye, kids.
Her mom had to tweet her because she was mad that her mom tweeted her sister the night before. So the next night I got tagged again in the tweet and it was Dempsey. But I just thought it was so funny because the only reason she had an interest in this, not only because her sister did, but again, it's story based. If sister had been doing a workbook page on, whatever, on vowel combinations, I don't think a pre-K student would care so much. But that's kind of that same idea. It just pulls kids in. I loved this tweet as a way to ponder curriculum, pacing, and scope and sequencing, and to see that they can live together. One doesn't take away from the other. This was a kinder teacher, but this is April 19th. And I'm going to show you some upper grade stuff too, that still all feeds through all of it. But she said, we had a few superhero vowels paid a visit this week. Since we've known the vowel secrets, we've known the vowels had more than one sound since the first week of school. So we didn't have to wait until this week in our phonics program to find out. But it was a fun review. In her phonics program, it's not until unit 10 of 10 that the other sound vowels can make is talk, which is the long sound. So they only get the short sound until the very last unit of the kindergarten year. If you consider that there's not a single word that doesn't have a vowel in it, and that every vowel is either going to be long or short or be part of a phonics pattern, so that's actually 3 possible things, that's like working with 2 out of 3 hands tied behind your back all year long, because you only have one sound to attack any vowel with. That means you're going to be wrong almost every time that you try to attack a word, especially if it's got more than one vowel in it, because there's no word without a vowel, and you've only got half of what you need to figure it out, really less than half because of the phonics patterns. So the idea that she would have to wait when she could do it in the very first day meant that she was able to harvest the value out of everything they did from unit 1 all the way to unit 10, instead of just working and pretending she was actually reading. It's funny because reading programs give you all these things to read, knowing that you haven't been given the phonics skills you need to actually read them. It's so ironic to me. Like, you get so much more out of a reading program when your kids can actually read it. Like, when they can read the words in it, it's so much better. And I guarantee you the reading program had both the long and the short sounds for the vowels without question. They just weren't going to let the kids in on that until the 10th unit. Now, you know why though? It was good. It was logical thinking. The reasoning was they weren't going to talk about the silent E until first grade, unit 1. So they didn't want to open a can of worms. The thinking was, if we tell kids vowels can be long or short, the first question they're going to ask is, well, how do I know? Like, when I try to read a word, let's say I read the word cat or I read the word hate. How do I know which sound the vowel is going to make? You said it could be long or it could be short, but you didn't tell me how to know. So they didn't want to open up the conversation to what they thought was an even more complex skill, which was silent E, which it is a complex skill taught as a skill. And so they thought best to let's not say anything about it. We'll just give them one sound for the vowels, but then we'll leave them with a little cliffhanger in unit 10, so that when they're all ready to start asking that question, summer will have come. And then when they start school, then we'll let them in on this idea that there's this silent E. Now, the problem is what that does is it unplugs the power from the 10 units of time that she spent teaching in kindergarten. Because that means that's been 10 months of time that they've been helpless to deal with what's in every single word. I mean, that's a minimal need, are the sounds that a vowel can make. That's just an absolute first thing you need right out of the gate. And they can have it because she already had it. Now, the difference was or the point here is her school is very scripted. They had to be on task with whatever the curriculum pacing guide stated. If an administrator walked in your room between a certain time frame, you need to be teaching what you're supposed to be teaching in this page range. But what you can always do is raise the bar. So she made the kids into the vowels. Their Kates had a long sound on one side and the short and lazy on the other. She built multisyllabic words using mommy E and babysitter, which I'm going to show you in just a minute, because kids need that at the same time to get the vowels. And it's so easy because they already know it. And then the kids could flip and flop in the word and change their sound based on how they're building the word. So she was still officially working on long and short vowel sounds. Should an administrator walk in, she just raised the bar 400 levels and turned it into something that was even far beyond what it had to be. But nobody's going to be upset with you for that. Like, that's not going against your district scope and sequence. That's just being responsive and understanding to read the word in the actual district material. They need to know the sound. And not just that, they need it for their name. They need it for the sight words. Like, this is a key thing they need. It's like a doctor saying you need this medicine. I can't not give it to you. That would be silly, especially if there's an easy way to do it. If there weren't, you couldn't, but there is. Now, as far as this mommy E goes, mommy E will tell any vowel that is one letter away, you say your name. And by darn it, you will, because if I have to, I'll get a hold of you and make you say your name. Mama E does not like to be ignored. She will make sure you do what you should. And she's close enough if she has to get a hold of you and make you do it. She's only one letter away. If Mama E is 2 letters away, she can yell and scream all she wants, but her little arms aren't long enough to reach you. Like in the word butter, butter. She's there, but she can't reach over those 2 T's to get a hold of that U and make him say his name. And that's why that word is butter and not buter. Because if Mama E were 1 letter away, butter would turn into buter pretty darn fast. Because I can get a hold of you and make you say your name. Now, instead of listening to me explain it, you can listen to him. This little guy is at a school where the principal rides a Segway around campus with a GoPro on her head and live tweets all day. Isn't that like the coolest thing? So she wheels in and out of classrooms and she's live tweeting the whole time, like just live tweets. So parents can tune in and maybe get lucky and happen to be at the time she's rolling into their room. So she rolled into this room and this little guy was trying to sound out the word like. And she noticed something that was weird. And she had a background in literacy, which is why she noticed it. Otherwise, she may not have. He was painstakingly sounding out the word like. So he's going, l, 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 and then he's looking at the alphabet train to see the letter L. And then he's copying the L. And then he goes, l, and then he looks up there to find the I. And he copies the I. And then he looks up, finds a K. And then when he finished the K, he just put an E at the end, which was very confusing to her because she thought, if you already knew there was an E at the end, then that would mean you just knew the word. So then you would have had to sound it out. But if you have to sound it out, how would you have known to put the E at the end? Like you either go one way or the other, right? Like you either know how to write the word like because you copy the word or you've seen the word. Or if you're sounding it out, you probably wouldn't know to put the E at the end if you're going 1 letter at a time. So she asked him, how did you know to put an E at the end of that word if you didn't know how to spell the word? And this was what he said. And we'll need to turn the sound way up. Okay.
So mommy E tells the I to say its name and like, so it says la, like. Says its name like he's supposed to.
Did you hear what he said at the end? Like he's supposed to. That's not a phonics rule. That's just what you do when your mom's right there and she tells you to do something. That's coming from a different place. It drives his behavior already every single minute of his life. He's just thinking along those lines to make a decision about the behavior of that letter, which means there's no working memory tax because this isn't anything new. This is just the law of the land when you're 5 and your mama tells you to do something. And I love that he said that at the end because it just shows you where he's pulling that information. It's like his emotional rudder that he uses to drive his decisions about what sounds letters are going to make. Now, having said that, mommy has got to get out of the house sometimes because, she just can't take it. Sometimes she needs a break. So when she gets out of the house, she'll put a babysitter vowel in charge. So if you see any vowel that's 1 letter away from another vowel, it's just the babysitter. It's doing exactly what mom would if she were there. It's going to tell that vowel that's 1 letter away. You say your name. Just like you listen to mom, you got to listen to Uncle Fred too. Now, kids already know that a babysitter is like mom, a teacher, a principal, a substitute. Like they understand an authority figure. And if one is nearby, they better behave. Now, if the authority figure is all the way on the other side of the room, they may not behave. So proximity is key. The closer you are, the more likely they are to do what they're supposed to do. The farther away you are, the more potential there is for chaos. So kids already navigate their behavior in this way, and they can do the same thing to figure out a word like, let's say, making or hoping. You know, those aren't advanced words. Those are just simple words, but there's no pretty little E to guide them. And so what happens? Where do they go? They need to have something that's going to grow with the words. So E is great, but E is not always there. And in a multisyllabic word, this is a lifesaver for kids at upper grades, like the teacher that mentioned about hyperventilate. How do you figure out long and short sounds? And these are best betting odds, by the way. It's not fail safe, and I'll show you what happens when it doesn't work. But you need your best betting odds to your advantage when you're attacking a multisyllabic word, because it's almost like a slot machine. You know how you try to get like 3 apples in a row? Like if you've got 3 vowels in a word plus phonics patterns in there, you want to get your most likely bet first for each sound, that hopefully it actually is recognizable as a word. It can't be a random crapshoot where you just try long or short or any combination thereof. Like there has to be a guiding force of what I'm most likely to get a try, because I know this, like mom is there, babysitter's there, so it's going to probably say its name. Mom is not in sight, there's no babysitter around, it's going to be short and lazy. Like it's just an easy way for kids to navigate. And it goes back to what they already know. Now, this is a little kindergartner named Abel. What I want to show you is how this can be. Babysitter vowels are often thought to be advanced. They're not. They're not at all. They're the same as Mama E. So this was a teacher. She's actually in the group. Her name is Kajersti, but she did a blog post. She said, let me tell you about a little guy named Abel. He's an English language learner, entered kinder knowing 7 letters, no sounds. Thanks better alphabet. He got them all by October. Yesterday, I sat down next to him and asked him to read to me. He pulled out Arthur's Halloween. I said, oh, this looks like a great picture read. Can you tell me a story to go with it? Because she assumed that he could not even possibly read it because it was kind of a tricky book and he only just finished his individual letter sounds. So she thought, you know, he wants to talk to me. He wants to have a conversation with me about this book. It's too advanced for him. So she was going to let him just talk her through the book. She said he gave her a strange look and he started reading it. She said, I was stunned. Later in the day, I had him read it again. He was so proud and I videoed it. She also dragged him all over the school in between that and this, had him read for the custodian and the cafeteria person in the office because she was so surprised he could do it and she was so excited for him. So he had been dragged all over the school, but you still see him trying to figure out the words, which I love. But she asks him, how did you know that was an I? How did you know what that sound was? How did you know this? And I think it's so helpful to hear him telling her that he knew because of a babysitter vowel or Mama E. You can hear his thinking kind of out loud. And also notice he, like those kindergarten kids in that class, he's never asking, what is this word? I don't know this word. He doesn't even think about his teacher being there. Like it's almost like he feels power and he shouldn't. He should feel powerless. So I love that he feels so powerful. He never asks her anything. Even when he stops at the word and has to fiddle with it and figure it out, it doesn't even occur to him to ask her because he does know the secrets in those words. He just takes a few minutes to figure them out. And this is going to be quieter too, I think so.
Hibernate. How do you know that says hibernate? Why does it say I? The mom or E. What do these two say? Why is that A getting to say its name? Good job. What do you need to do there? Is there a secret in that word? What is that I doing in that word? A. What does he tell that A to do? That's right. So try it again. Right. Good job.
And for look and spooky, he had to shift gears in the middle of the word because the secret has both the oo and the sound. And so he had to shift. I'm trying to find it, which I can't right now. But anyway, it's 2 different sounds it can make. And so he had to actually use both of those to go through both of those words. And what I really liked is he wasn't calling the words. Like he wasn't one step ahead already saying the word practically before he looked at it. He had to stop. Like even for house, you could almost hear his wheels spinning because he went house. And then he got to the word look and then spooky. But he reminded me of somebody that could he wanted to tinker, like a mechanic that was trying to figure out something and he didn't know exactly what it was, but if you give him a few minutes and let him play with it a little bit, he can kind of work through it. And that's what we want kids to do when they get to text. Like we want them to take everything they know and then use that as this critical thinking exercise as they start to kind of twist and turn and plot and play, because that's got its own value all to itself. But they have to have that ownership so that what they aren't thinking about is phonics rules. Like it has to be something they can pull quickly so they can really focus on the task at hand, which is how do I blend these sounds together? And then what word do I actually hear? And if you're not an English speaking student, that makes it even more difficult because you've got a different accent and you may or may not know those vocabulary words. What was interesting to me about this is she said, I had no idea he knew anything other than individual letters. I didn't know he knew babysitter vowels or mommy E. I didn't teach him that. He was there. He was on the rug when I was talking about that for the kids who were ready, but I could have just as easily only talked about that at small group, because typically that is maybe what I would have planned. Like if I were to plan it, I would have thought, oh, well, these guys don't need this. I'll talk about that with the kids who are already reading short vowel words and I'll teach it in small group. Don't do that. Like teach things in small group, but don't hold things back, because everybody can hear Cinderella. Not everybody's going to get the message about, you know, the prince and the stepsisters and the mean. Not everybody's going to take it all in, but nobody's going to be harmed by it. And you never know when they're going to get a hankering for the coleslaw that you put on the buffet. Like you just don't know when Abel's going to want to put his peanut butter down and try the thing everybody else is eating over here. So you don't want a gatekeeper of who gets what when all the time, because you can miss the boat. Because there's one of us, there's 25 of them, light bulbs are popping on and off all the time. Like a buffet is just so much cleaner and easier. It just means, look, it's right here. We're going to run through this stuff all the time in everything we do. Help yourself. The minute you're ready to actually use it, go for it. And if you think about that key analogy from the beginning, once a kid understands what a key does and goes, oh, I got one of those. Let me see if I can get in the candy closet. Do they have to relearn that with every new key? No, right? Like once you get what a key does, that it opens stuff, then you're on the lookout for even more keys to get into more stuff, but you don't have to relearn it. The secrets are the same way. Once they get what these are to helping them read and write words, they can just start using all of them, meaning they already know ah or sh, or they already know those things. Once they plug in what to do with that, now they have all of those at their disposal. So the learning curve isn't to grab the sounds. The learning curve is transferring it to realize, oh, those are the sounds that are in the words. That's how I read the words or spell the words. Once they get that, then it's just a matter of gaining comfort, gaining coordination with it, like using it, blending it, hearing it. But they already have what they need to kind of hit the ground running. So I guess that's the point. Normally, traditionally, we wait to teach the skill until the child's ready for it, right? Because why would we give them a skill they're not even ready to use? So we wait until you know the T before we teach you the TH, or we wait until you know your short vowel sounds before we would teach you the silent E to then talk about the long vowel sounds. So we're like the waitress waiting for you to finish your salad to bring you your steak, because I don't want you to have your salad and your steak or you'll feel overwhelmed. And a waitress does have to be careful with that. But if you're at a buffet, it's totally different because you're not overwhelmed. There could be 1,000 foods on the buffet and you only want salad, and that's fine. Nobody's expected to eat everything on the buffet. It's just there for the taking so that you can help yourself. But we want them to have access to the buffet so that, like Abel, when they're ready to start eating, they don't need us to open the gate. Like as soon as they're ready to get with it, he's obviously very smart, clearly very smart. He was taking in information long before she ever thought he was even ready to take in information. She had not planned to give it to him, but he was there. She didn't say, okay, Abel, close your eyes. You're not ready for this. I don't even want you to hear it. Cover your ears. Okay, everybody else, there's something called Mommy E. And like, she didn't do that. She just tossed it out with no plan for him. And yet he was ready to take it. And what I thought was so helpful is she said, it made me really rethink how I put myself in the middle of everything as the waitress, because when it comes to the code, these aren't phonics skills. So they're not phonics skills, they're just stories. There's no harm. So if you feel like you want to toss something out, go ahead. At worst, you've just told a fun story for kids to make a fun sound with and play. At best, some of those kids are ready to use it now. And ideally, it's incubating and percolating for the kids who aren't. And I told her what my hunch was, because she did feel badly that she didn't know that he was ready, because she said, I felt like, and she used the buffet analogy. She said, I felt like he was just wanting peanut butter and that was it. And I felt like when I last checked, all he was eating was peanut butter, even though everybody else was starting to eat this other stuff. But I felt like I turned around, and when I turned back, I saw like a dab of coleslaw or chicken salad on his cheek. And I thought, well, that's weird. He doesn't eat that. He only eats peanut butter. And I turned back around, and sure enough, there was more. And then I turned around the third time and he had it all over his face, and I missed the whole thing. I didn't even know he was going to the buffet, let alone eating from it. And she said, I felt like I should have been more aware. of what he could do and when, because I would have had him in a whole different, like I would have been working on like blends. I may have never, she said, honestly, I may never have taught him babysitter vowels because I would have just thought maybe Mama E and after the holiday, but I wouldn't have had like an idea of he needs to learn babysitter vowels because of where he was. And it took him, you know, this long to just learn letter sounds. My theory is the reason all this came out so quickly is he took so long to learn the individual letter sounds that until he's at least halfway through those, the secrets aren't really helpful. Once you have more than half of the individual letter sounds, plus you have 4 or 5 or 6 secrets, now you can actually start making sense of certain words. Like let's say you have the ow sound, but you don't have the H. It doesn't help that you have the ow sound because you don't have the H. But as soon as you get the H and you have the ow sound, how? Hey, I read that word. That word's how. Because I happen to have both of the parts that come together to be a word that I know. Or the same thing with the word her. Like I can know the but if I don't have the H sound, then I can't read it. Or let's say I know all the individual letters, but I don't have the Now it's her. So the secrets require the letters to work and the letters require the secrets to work. But as kids get a little more and more of both, that's when things are popping off everywhere. Like where you're not even commercials, road signs, lunch menus when they're walking home. Words are everywhere. But until you get at least half of the individual letters under your belt and then 4 or 5 or 6 secrets, it's not connecting. So I think he actually just took longer to get those individual sounds. And it wasn't until he got at least 3/4 of the way through that the secrets he had heard were actually starting to apply and power up. And that's when he was starting to notice them and use them. She just assumed it was linear, as we most do. We think you have to do this before you can do that, and you have to do that before you can do this. So anyway, I just thought this was a great example. Now, this is the Lex Luthor of the alphabet. And what I'm going to do is we're going to stop in at 11:30 for lunch, because I know you guys have been sitting. I'm a terrible break giver because I have so much I want to get out. So I figured you guys know you can help yourselves to go to the bathroom if you like. I should have said that at the beginning. I didn't, I'm sorry, but you are welcome to. But we will break at 11:30. But I want to make sure that I get to a certain point. So this is the Lex Luthor of the alphabet. This is Sneaky Y. He found out about the vowel secrets. He found out they had superpowers, and he was really mad because he hates his sound. He thinks y is the ugliest sound of the alphabet. So what he did was he decided to be sneaky, and he snuck into the closets of Superhero E and Superhero I, and he took one of each of their capes, which is where their powers lie. So now when he's at the end of a word and he doesn't think anybody's going to see him, he'll always be wearing either his E cape or his I cape so that he can use their powers to say their name. Like Mom E, Candy, Daddy, Sky, July. Or if he's even hidden between other letters and doesn't think he'll be spotted, like hydraulic or hyperventilate or hydrogen or hyper. Anytime he thinks he can't be seen, that's where he'll be sneaky. When he's front and center, like when he's the line leader or the first letter in the word, like in yellow, yes, you, yak, he behaves exactly as he should. Just like any good line leader would, right? Aren't all kids great when they're the line leader? Like even the worst behaved kid in your class, if you make him the line leader, he looks like an angel fallen from the sky. He's like, he's perfect. But you know that if you put him somewhere else in your line, like especially in the caboose position, there's some kids we would never even allow to be the caboose. Way too much freedom and flexibility back there because they could get into all kinds of trouble, and they're more likely to when they're farther away. So the same rule applies for positional sounds of Y. This is a very complicated phonics scale. It's positionally based, and it's taught toward the end of 2nd grade, and yet it's everywhere. Your calendar alone makes it impossible for you to teach that Y says yeah, because on that calendar, Y does everything except say yeah. You've got May, you've got January, you've got February, you've got Thursday, you've got July. Literally every word on that calendar seems to have a Y in it, and they're all making different sounds. Every big book is by a certain author. That is the boys' bathroom. It seems like Y does everything except the one thing it's supposed to, because really the only words that it says yeah in are like yellow, yes, you, and yak. Those are like your core print-rich words that are likely to be a K2, focus. Every other time they see it, it's making all these other sounds, which again makes it hard to teach and very difficult for kids to read all the words that pile up until the end of 2nd grade. This little guy's pointing to his friend's shirt because he spotted himself. He's dressed up like Sneaky Y, and she happens to be wearing him, which he thought was really cool. Now, this is Fonzie, and he is going to explain that EY-AY is not Sneaky Y. Sneaky Y can make the EY, he says E or I all by himself. He doesn't need any help, but EY-AY is a secret because when they get together, they just act too cool for school.
AY and EY. These letters are just too cool. So with thumbs up and their coolest voices, they say,
A. A.
Now there's a little E on the side because they can, of course, also make the E sound, but the A sound is their first course of action. And I played that clip because I know a lot of you are too young to know who Fonzie is, right? Like you have no idea who Fonzie is, so now you know. He's just too cool. Now these are like best betting odds for Las Vegas. It just arms kids with some sort of a guide to attack words they've never seen before. But if they've got a Y in them, they've got some good bets up their sleeves. Like they know if he's front and center at the beginning of the word, he's going to behave just like I would if I were the line leader and everybody's watching. He's going to go, yeah, yeah, yeah. Now, if he's at the end and nobody's going to spot him, or even if he's buried between some other letters, that's where he's going to be sneaky. And these are the two things he can do when he's being sneaky. And if he's, I forgot, when he's with E or A, that's right, that's when they get so cool and go A. So you know how like Johnny might behave one way, but when Johnny and Sam are together, whole different scenario. So that's the deal with EY, AY. Like Y does what he does, but when EY and AY get together, they have a whole different behavior. That's when they're just too cool. So it just arms kids with some attacks that give them a way to make sense of words without having to just memorize hundreds of them until they're gifted with this phonics skill at the end of second grade. This is a high leverage phonics skill. And what that means is, like Mommy E and babysitter vowels, it's something you're going to be manipulating every day. Like every day, you're going to have hundreds of words that are going to have Y making all these sounds in them. So you get a lot of mileage out of this. This is a big bang for your buck piece. And yet it's complex, taught as a phonics skill. Now, this is a Stanford study. This is kind of where we're going to try to wrap for lunch around this part. But Stanford did a study. If you're wondering how the science of reading really kind of came about, much of it was from this study in terms of what gave a good foothold for kids who struggle to learn and whose needs aren't being met, because then the American Disabilities Act gets involved, and that's where legislation starts to come into play. And then that's where school districts have to step up and try to provide training to accommodate everyone who's not getting that equal education. And a lot of that stemmed from this study. But that wasn't the point of this study. The point of this study, this was a Stanford brain study. And what I loved about the study, because I was talking about this before science of reading had come about. And really, science of reading is just how the brain learns to read. But what it also needs to pull into it is how the brain actually learns. That's the missing piece right now from what a lot of the science of reading focus seems to be. There's more to the brain than just how it learns to read. There have to be emotional connections. There has to be meaning connections, and it has to be deliverable to a user that's 5. But anyway, all of that to say, what I used to focus on initially was the point of this exercise. This was done because it was at a time, and still in many districts they are, kids had to memorize 300 sight words to progress to second grade. If they did not have mastery of these 300 words, and I don't mean they had to read the words, they had to know the words, like an actor learning a script. They had to know 300 words. If they didn't know those words, they could not go to second grade. They had to be retained. So you had teachers taking the bulk of their time, the bulk of their instructional time was spent flashing a lot of cards at kids so they'd know these words in lieu of actually reading, like learning how to decode. And for the kids who don't get help at home, or for the kids who have more of a repetition of use it needed in order to own it, you know, because the use it time's different for everybody. Some can do it once, some take 465 repetitions. So a lot of kids who needed the most socialization were stuck in the chair at recess having more cards flashed in their face because they weren't getting it. So Stanford decided, let's do a brain study. Let's actually look at this from, let's use a brain scan image. And I love studies that use brain scan images because you can't cheat on those. You either see engagement or you don't. And the more engagement you see and the more areas you see it, the more impact you made. So it's not like somebody put a spin on it or there's a philosophical perspective or they use different numbers. Like it's literally a picture and you either see 5 blinks or 12 or 0 or 1. So they wanted to see if kids call words versus have to actively decode them, how is the brain circuitry different? And is one more valuable than the other? Is one more optimal brain circuitry than the other? And what they found was there was virtually no optimal brain engagement, meaning there was no beneficial activation happening when kids called a word. It was pure recognition, and it was a quick blink in the area that recognized the word or no blink if they didn't recognize the word. When kids had to actively decode the sounds and then use those sounds to put together the word like this. Hit. I had my brother last night because he was really bad. All kinds of things are going on. Just the fact that they had to call each letter, like make the sounds for each letter. They had to hear those letters, blend them together, and those little pieces had to come together to make meaning. So all of that's happening in different parts of the brain. When kids just call the word hit, call the word bat, call the word rat, there was no interactive brain engagement. So the recommendation by Stanford was, based on what we see, never have kids memorize words they could just read. Just let them read the words. Now, the problem is that didn't help teachers very much because we're not memorizing for our own amusement and enjoyment. We're memorizing words because kids can't read them, right? Like if you think of these words, like the word saw or the word her, if you're going to hold off the R-controlled vowel skill until first grade or early second, respectively, kids can't read the word her. It would be huh-era. The word how would be huh-ow, huh-awa. That would be huh-at until first grade when you get the TH. So we were memorizing words because they hadn't learned the phonics skills they needed in order to read them. So it was great that Stanford said there's more benefit to doing it this way, but how do we do that? Like, okay, great, yay, we'll have them read words instead of memorize them. Now, how do we do that? How do we help them read words with phonics skills in them that they haven't learned yet? And that Stanford didn't offer any suggestion on. They just said there's more optimal brain circuitry when they decode than when they memorize. What they also said was that the activity that was, oh, this was the important part. I forgot this part. When they took upper grade learners and tracked back, what they saw was that the weakest readers, the dyslexia labeled students in this study, were calling words, their hemisphere, let me just say this actually a different way, because I didn't say this. When kids called words, the engagement was occurring on the right hemisphere. When kids actively were decoding words, the engagement they saw was on the left hemisphere. When they tracked that up to the higher grade levels and looked at skilled readers versus very poor struggling readers, they saw that the struggling readers were showing engagement on the right hemisphere, as the skilled readers were showing engagement on the left hemisphere. So the presumption then was, if we're training kids to read in a way that is engaging the right hemisphere, we're training them to read poorly. We're actually training the brain to read wrong. We're teaching the brain how to become an unskilled reader. If we can engage the brain to activate on the left hemisphere, that is actually where we're seeing the skilled readers engage as they're making their way through text. So if you force kids to memorize more than they read, you're training the brain to read wrong. You're training the brain to view reading as a right hemisphere activity. And that is exactly where we see our low readers showing engagement as they try to make their way through text. So that is the genesis for the science of reading, is that if you are intentionally teaching in a way that is forcing the brain to do something that we already know results in poor reading, we need to do that differently. We need to be actively decoding words so that we are getting the engagement on the right hemisphere, well, on the left, on the correct hemisphere, which is the left hemisphere, because that is the area that skilled readers use to read. And so thereby we cannot memorize words any longer, which then comes the influx of all the phonics skills and all the phonics rules and all the things that you probably didn't learn if you've taught